Today, I am honored to introduce you to Alex Viada, an incredible father to a ridiculously handsome young boy, a dog lover, a wolf lover, a horse lover, and an all-around animal lover, the owner of Complete Human Performance, inventor of hybrid training, author of The Ultimate Hybrid Athlete. Alex is one of the most intimidatingly strong, jacked, and intelligent humans I've ever met. I've followed Alex for nearly 15 years. I hired him as my coach for nearly 2 years, and I learn from him every single time I have the pleasure of speaking with him. Alex is one of the greatest coaches in the world, and I'm beyond blessed to have him here with me today. Alex Viada, welcome to the podcast.
Jordan, we are so overdue, first of all.
We are.
I know, we've been talking on, we used to chat all the time, obviously, when we were working together. A lot's happened since then. First off, I wanted to thank you for making me sound so much cooler than I think I've ever seen myself.
That was a very under the radar. You're much cooler than
this
that.
This has been great, though. I feel really good. This is a good positive start. Oh, but man, it's been really, really cool. And, I think, God, when we first met years ago, I know, we were both very much in the thick of fitness industry growth phase at that point. And it's been, it's really cool to be able to talk to you over the years, stay in touch. I think we both changed. We both kind of matured in our thoughts on fitness, our thoughts on life, family, everything else. So it's been really good to be a part of that. So I'm so blessed and happy to be able to sit down and talk with you today.
Thank you, man. Likewise. And it's been cool to go from fitness colleagues to friends who can have really meaningful conversations outside of fitness, which is part of what we're going to do today.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, because, I think we both owe fitness a lot.
Yes.
But I think as things change, as the industry changes, you don't have to be defined by your work. You don't have to be defined by your background. And it's been really valuable to sometimes even just see fitness and that industry as kind of a microcosm of a lot of other things going on.
Yes.
And so, I'm looking forward to those conversations too.
So just to start off with a very easy question, who are you?
If I had to sum it up, I would say I am a guy who, over the course of my life, has no idea what I'm doing.
I relate to that very strongly.
Because I think there have been so many times in my life where I've thought, I think this is very much a philosophy I think a lot of people will share. I always thought I was building towards something, building towards a career. When I first went to college, I knew what I wanted to be. That didn't work out. When I graduated from college, I got started in a couple jobs and in an industry that I thought, okay, this is it. This is where I want to be. Years in the industry, I realized that wasn't it. So I started a new career. And I think I've been really lucky in that's given me the chance to do a lot of different things. And I think if anything, that's who I am, is just somebody who's done a lot of different things, not because I think, oh, wow, I'm amazing. I like trying new things. I don't always like trying new things. But I've very often in my life found that when you hit a point where you aren't happy with what you're doing, you try a little bit of everything and you see what sticks. And I think that's been my personal philosophy. And I think that's where a lot of my growth has come from. A lot of my appreciation for other people, whether it's, other people's knowledge, people of different backgrounds. And I think if anything else, I think what has always kind of defined my career and really a lot of my viewpoints is just having the privilege of having so many people around me from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different sports, different industries and all that, sharing a little bit of their expertise with me. And so I always kind of think of myself as just somebody who learns stuff for the sake of being able to then bring that to other people. So I think that's really who I am. And I know that's not, that has nothing to do, well, sort of has something to do with my book, but it's, I think that's kind of what I value in myself.
I think I'm always excited to hear people's answer to that question because it runs the gamut. Some people are purely, they'll just go into what they do fitness or business wise. Other people are more, the answers have been very fun to receive and to hear how people more define themselves in this moment. So I thought that was great. No. It was very Alex of you. What misconceptions do people have about you?
Oh man. God, that's hard to say. That's really hard to say because one of the things I've always maintained, and this comes from having a lot of exposure very early on in the industry when I wasn't really ready for exposure, is people's conceptions of you are based on about the 5% of yourself that you show to everyone else. And whether or not you like it, A, you're responsible for that because no one all of us, no matter how hard we try, we're never 100% authentic. We show a little bit of ourselves that we want to see, and we show a little bit of our authentic self, but then we mesh it with a little bit of image, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of the ways we like to see ourselves, and the end result is not always truly accurate. So I don't actually know how a lot of people perceive me. I don't know. I don't know if there are people out there who, perceive me as somebody who has very set beliefs. I don't know if people perceive me as having no hard perspectives on anything whatsoever. I think the biggest misconception among all this is that the one thing that comes up again and again is that, and this is more of like a career related thing, is this idea that I'm mostly interested in like working with elite performance and working with elite athletes or working with, very kind of high level, cutting edge. And don't get me wrong, I love that. But my approach to training and fitness has never been about it can apply to the top 1%, but it's never specifically been for them. And a lot of what got me into this was wanting to make things accessible to people and wanting to help anybody get better at what they do or find something new to be excited about. So maybe that's the biggest misconception. But, it's interesting that you asked that too, because if you ask people what the biggest misconception about themselves is, they may also say, this may not be the biggest misconception about them. It may be just something that somebody said that they don't like.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't know. I would almost have to ask, like, what do you see me as?
I have a very different perspective because I don't know you. Like, it's not like we hang out every day, but I know you better than someone who just randomly follows you on social media. Yeah. I think that you're spot on that based on everyone should go follow you right now if you're not following Alex on Instagram. He doesn't post as much as I would like him to. But when you do post, and as people hear in this conversation, you are, I meant it, you are intimidatingly intelligent. And you are, you've deadlifted over 700 pounds. You've run a sub 4:30-minute mile. Like, you're not only super intelligent, you're also you're an incredible athlete on top of that. So I think people, it's an astute observation to think that, if people see your content and see what you do, they might think you only work with the elite of the elite of the elite. And so I think that would make sense for someone to think that, because I would say that, look, especially having spent a lot of time on your content over the last few days, there isn't a lot that I would say the average individual who doesn't have a super high level of knowledge would be able to look at and say, this directly applies to me, even though it does. Yeah. But the barrier to entry is a high level of knowledge to then break that information down into something that is more easily digestible for the average. So I think that would make sense. But I think in your online coaching program and in your books and everything, like it becomes much more accessible to the average individual.
And I appreciate that, because it's hard, because you don't want to insult people's intelligence by oversimplifying things. Right. And one of the things I've always struggled with is, how do you make complex ideas actionable? Not just how do you make them simple, how do you make them actionable? So one of the things I've always struggled with is, because often I talk about things that I think are cool.
Yes.
I literally like a 13-year-old kid talking about dinosaurs or something. I'm like, oh, look, I just learned this. This is really cool. I want to share this with everybody. And I'm like, are people going to care? Probably not. That's why I started doing, I don't know if you follow like my Instagram stories, but for a long time I was just doing ones on topics I thought were cool. Yeah. I would just be like, oh, I want to talk about this today. I would go out on this long discussion on something that probably 3 people cared about. Yeah. But I was having fun, and I was like, no, nobody really seems to. They watched the first one. You watch the viewership numbers. It's like 4,000 watched the first video, 2,000 watched the second, 500 watched the third. I'm going, all right, I think I'm losing them there. So I started doing Q&As. Yes. Because it was the only way to say, well, what are people actually interested in? Yeah. And that's been kind of a tough bridge to cross, because a lot of people, I don't think people need simple. I think people need actionable. Like, what do I get out of this? That is really tough to do. And I admire the hell out of communicators in this space, or any science related space, who are just capable of taking complex headlines and complex concepts and everything else. I mean, that's been your career. Yeah. Is you're like, okay, I know all this stuff. I've learned all this stuff. Let me help people act on it without insulting their intelligence, by making it into something that they can understand. And I respect the hell out of that.
You said something, and usually I don't go into this early on. I have a couple of main questions I asked, but you said something that I think is really interesting. I want to dive into it a little bit. You said it's impossible to be 100% authentic on social media, which is completely accurate. It's impossible because as soon as you start thinking about how am I going to frame this, how am I going to say this, how am I going to share this, you don't even have to talk about filters or editing. You could just start thinking about how am I going to say this? Well, all of a sudden it's no longer it's not 100% authentic because you're trying to think what's the best way for me to frame this. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is accurate in that I think it's truly impossible to be 100% authentic. So my question is, in what ways do you struggle to be 100% authentic?
You know, I think one of the times I struggle with is I'm kind of a little bit crotchety and grumpy in my old age here. I will say that. Kids these days. But, you know, there's something that happens over time, I think, and it's not that you necessarily get jaded. It's that every time something comes up and you see it again, an instinctive part of you always gets a little bit annoyed that this is still an issue or that this is still a conversation. And every time it happens, it generates a little bit more irritation, a little bit more annoyance. Bless those people who are so zen and calm a mindset that this doesn't happen to them. But fighting that and fighting that initial urge and continuously applying a principle of charity to things, my general thought process through something is to immediately get irritated and then have a dialogue with myself to sort of soften that as much as possible. What finally comes out at the end is the softer outcome. And what I think that sometimes misses is a huge part of who we are and what people find relatable is not just that final outcome, because anybody can sit up on a stage and put out a carefully curated, very even-handed perspective. That may not be what they're thinking. And the people in the audience, that's not what they're thinking. They're hearing this message. For them, they're going through that whole roil of emotions, the irritation, the arguments they've had about it, the discussions, this, that, and the other. I find it very, very hard to express, I think, a little bit of my initial feelings without coming across as snarky or judgmental or anything else. Because you know sometimes if somebody says something and you're just like, wow, that is jaw-droppingly stupid. But that's part of your reaction, right? You're like, wow, I can't believe that this is the same species as I am, and this was their thought process. Like, I don't understand that. But that's a normal reaction.
Yeah.
And that's authentic. That's authentic, showing that, you know, as humans, we go through a lot of things. We all have, you know, our tribal affiliations, so to speak. We all have our preconceived notions. We all have our trigger points and our buttons and everything else. It's very, very difficult to show that. And I think that makes it easy to judge people. Especially when you see somebody who removes all of that in their messaging. You know, oh, well, how can you be so sure about this? Well, I'm not, but I argued with myself for about 3 hours and this is what I came out with. You know, little things like that. And I think it's very hard to show the process because, you know, humans are complex. Our brains are complex. The way we think about things are complex. We're not a we're not a computer with a big storage medium up here. Like, the brain is an association engine. It creates memories based on ideas and based on smells and thoughts and concepts all roiled together. Every time we think about something, we're recreating our opinion on it, basically. That's a complex process. And I think to portray ourselves as these very wise entities or as having all the answers or as having a very set perspective on something, that's not always the truth. I can sit down and put together a carefully crafted post on anything from politics to views on science to anything else and say, this is authentic. This is what I believe, but it's still been curated. The thought process that got me there, my doubts, my questioning, things that I believe, you know, 70% of me believes this, whereas in this argument, 95% of me believes this, and another one, 51% of me believes this. That's what gets left out. I think that nuance and that self-questioning that goes on, that gets left out, which I think absolutely crucial to the human experience. And I think not being able to do that, I think that's what very often leads to this disconnect where people will look at you and look at your persona and think, oh, well, he's got all this figured out. He's got all this figured out, but then he thinks that's hypocritical. You know, this person lacks self-awareness. And you're going, not really when you dig into it. So I think that's my hardest thing is trying to show my own doubts, trying to show my own concerns, trying to show my own thought processes that led to something, trying to show the difference between my initial reaction to something and then my self-corrected action to something. Because I think there's a lot of learning in there a big part of learning and big part of understanding yourself and emotional development and everything else is not preventing yourself from having an initial reaction. It's walking yourself through it and understanding it and analyzing it. And a lot of that, I think, gets left out. And I think that's an exercise that people get into when they have dialogue. When we have discussion, we sit down, we approach a topic. I say one perspective, you say the other perspective. We bounce back and forth and we reach some sort of nuanced outcome. Anything on social media or any sort of media based on that very polarized, one person gives their speech here, another person gives the response here, all of that's lost. And I think that's where that authenticity is lost.
It's a great answer. It also makes me think about this authenticity over a longer period of time. So like in a relationship, for example, like you're talking about how that initial reaction, like, fuck, that was just such a stupid thing to say. Like, and you have that initial reaction. That might not happen on your post. People might not see that. But if you're talking with someone in person, like your spouse, for example, you might have an initial reaction that later on you can come back and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I reacted emotionally. I apologize. And that's actually what will deepen the relationship because, or the opposite, where it's like you don't come back, you don't apologize, you don't recognize the mistake you made. And so then that can create a divide in the relationship. But that these interactions, they're not static. They're not in one individual interaction. It's not one post. It's when you have an in-person relationship with someone and you have the opportunity to see how they react emotionally and then how they can make that more logical over time and how they can maybe say, hey, I'm going to put my ego to the side. I'm going to apologize, or the opposite, I'm not. This is what creates true authenticity and a deep, meaningful relationship with someone as opposed to social media, which can be, as we all understand, very surface level. But I think you just articulated a reason why it's surface level or how it's surface level that personally I had never even considered.
Well, it's funny because I think a lot of social media we get in a mindset where we're almost writing headlines more than we're having discussions. I think when people write a post, it's they have something that they want to say. They have an announcement. They want something want to get across. It is very rare to see somebody come out with something raw and then put that out in the world and then come back and later say, hey, that was just my first reaction. I probably shouldn't have done that. It happens every now and then. And when it happens, we're all aghast.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You have people apologizing for something that was said in anger and you go, wow, how could they let that happen?
Yeah.
That's saying, how could we let somebody go through the normal human process
Yes.
of having an emotional reaction to something, having a little bit of their underlying self come through, and then later think it's later apologize for it? That is the most normal thing on earth.
Yes.
And I think, even if you look back 50, 60 years, there wasn't the opportunity. Not all of us were accustomed to speaking in headlines. And I think now that's become something that we're all very, very good at. And, whether or not that this is a positive development, I don't know. But it has led to a certain responsibility to curate your own image, which I think is pervasive into other areas as well.
It is interesting that you bring up someone, they have an emotional reaction, then they come back and maybe they apologize for it. The most interesting thing to me is when people then eviscerate them afterwards, where it's like, how could you? I lost all respect for you. It's like, really?
Yeah.
That's crazy to me that like this person, they had an emotional reaction and when they come back and they take ownership of it, you look through the comments and people are just, it's actually a very discouraging aspect of social media and then what this has led to is now people don't want to apologize when they've done something wrong because they know when they do apologize, it's only going to get worse. So then they dig their heels in further. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a really, unfortunate aspect of social media.
Well, and I think when this was the purview of politicians and writers and philosophers, when the printed word was the purview of those, and it was seen as a medium in which there was a degree of permanence, I think even a lot of these individuals would have different ways of having discussions. This wasn't their only method of communication. You weren't always necessarily most people don't necessarily want to be accountable for everything they ever said. Not because they shouldn't be accountable to, their thoughts but we all misspeak.
Yes.
We all have bad takes on things that could be based on a lack of information. And one of the hardest ways to stay authentic is, again, to want to say something, to have an opinion on something and let that out there without necessarily either curating it and realizing, okay, look, there's nothing wrong with somebody who has a very strong but uneducated opinion on something, writing it out there, and then going, wait, is that true? Looking it up and realizing, oh, I was wrong. I probably shouldn't say anything. Nothing wrong with that. But otherwise, people coming out and they're saying, well, I want to speak on this. I'm going to go research what my opinion should be to speak to my audience on it. And maybe we'll even think we're being authentic. I want to write something that is very much on this particular topic that I care about. And I'm going to make sure it's either a intentionally insightful or very generalized, post on this or whatever else. And I'm going to specifically put that idea forward rather than just saying whatever comes to mind, saying my true thoughts on it. Nobody does that because you can't, like you're saying, we're punished for it. So true authenticity is difficult because it's not really allowed.
Yeah.
And, even when people go, okay, well, I'm going to be really raw here for a moment. I used to be worried about this. When you're still worried about this.
Yes.
Cut it out. You're still bothered by this. Like, puffing yourself up here and going, usually the crotchety bit coming out, puffing yourself up here and going, well, I'm past this and, here are my thoughts and all this. And, you're still curating it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You still have so many doubts. You may only decide to talk about it now because you feel like you're finally in a position where you can talk about it. And that's fine. But now you're only showing authenticity once you've come to a point. That whole doubt, questioning, uncertainty, and all that is all part of the human experience. That's all been removed. People only see your current outcome and not the human that went through all that and grew through that whole process.
What is something you used to believe, but you no longer do?
It's difficult to answer that too, because I think so many of my beliefs more evolve than they do flat out change. I've had some political beliefs that I think have changed quite a bit, but more like economic beliefs,
Okay.
Coming from a very sort of, libertarian when I was a teenager, like everybody else, and going, the whole libertarian economic perspective, which doesn't really work. So I've had a lot of things like that where it was almost more like youthful excitement that, made me really, really libertarian about some things. And so I think in that regard, I think at least politically, I've started to appreciate the complexity of interconnected systems a lot more.
Okay.
Because everything about me, especially when I was younger, used to be about personal freedoms, personal freedom to do anything. And there was a very much almost, I wouldn't say anti-society, but there was this thought that, well, I should be able to do what I want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And then you realize how often personal beliefs can lead to disconnects there. And, the value of like a social contract and a lot of potential answers there. But that's one thing. I've become a lot more, I would say, socially aware of the interplay of personal beliefs and boundaries between personal beliefs and, what sort of responsibilities we owe to our society because we're a part of it. And, we may owe to a government because in effect, they're helping us help ourselves. So that's one area. There are others in fitness and the like, but we don't need to go there.
I'm really interested in this. So where does the line between personal freedom and I don't even know what the other phrase is, like personal freedom and then this social contract bleed into one another? And do you think there's a limit on personal freedom? Or maybe even better start with, how do you define freedom?
Well, I think it's very, very difficult to define it because I think as a whole, as soon as we institute any sort of system of government, any sort of governance over ourselves, we basically assume that we are going to assign certain responsibilities to that governance. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist.
Okay.
If we assign certain responsibilities to it, it means it's going to have certain areas in which it's either going to enforce a set of regulations that everyone is going to follow, or it's going to ensure a careful distribution of funds, and so on and so forth. For that to work, everybody needs to be bought into the social contract a little bit, which means everybody needs to make certain concessions. As soon as you do that to any extent, you remove a certain amount of personal freedoms.
Correct.
So a lot of it is really based on what you expect the government to do and realizing how many expectations we may have for a government, whether it's for defense, whether it's for implied health care. One of the things I always get into is, does the government have an obligation to force you to wear your seatbelt? Things like that. You would think it's the ultimate and personal responsibility. If I go flying through the windshield, that's nobody's responsibility but my own. But then you think, do private individuals or do healthcare, do they have the right to refuse care? And does the emergency medical team on staff have the right to refuse emergency treatment for a severely injured person who is severely injured because they weren't wearing a seatbelt, as opposed to, like, let's just say there were no seatbelt laws.
Yep.
If you're not wearing a seatbelt, it is nobody's responsibility to treat you, other than, like, let's just say within the purview of, let's just say that emergency medical teams were allowed to exercise like triage. Okay, well, if you weren't wearing your seatbelt, we're not responsible for how badly you get hurt. Does that work? Like,
So here's my thoughts. On one hand, we're talking about an individual who is driving on their own, and I had no idea this was going to go down this route, but I love this type of discussion. We have an individual who is driving on their own. It's not part of their job. They're just driving, and they can choose whether or not to wear the seatbelt, which obviously, if you're not wearing a seatbelt, that's stupid. We understand that. But let's just say, like, they can choose. Whereas the doctors or the nurses or whomever, they're in a job. And their job can dictate what their rules are as part of that job. And anytime you sign up for a job, you're essentially saying, I'm willing to take on the removal of my personal freedoms based on the rules that need to be set out for me as part of this job. I feel like that's an apples to orange comparison, because on one, it's just a personal freedom, someone making a choice on their own. Whereas for our medical professionals, or for really any professional, you're like, hey, here's the rules of the job. And for doctors, it's like, we have to treat people regardless, which is one of the issues that we saw during COVID, when there were doctors saying, like, we're not going to treat people who didn't get the vaccine. Like, and obviously that was a very small group of people who, and they often regretted saying that afterwards. But, like, if you sign up to be a doctor, you treat people no matter what. And that's what comes with the job. So do you agree or disagree with what I just said? Like, is that an apples to orange comparison, or what do you think?
well, I think where it starts to diverge then is who is financially responsible for the intervention, for their job, who is paying them.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, if, like, let's just say we had universal health care, okay? And no matter what, you had to get treated. Would you then have to enter into a social contract that said you have the personal responsibility to ensure that you are taking steps to prevent severe injury or illness? You would almost say, okay, well, let's just say if we had universal health care, everyone was paying into it. Would you be upset if somebody else didn't wear their seatbelt and cost the system $1 million for, a 3-4 week hospital stay in a coma? Whereas if they did wear their seatbelt, they may have just gotten a bang on the head. Is that reasonable to expect, therefore, that with universal health care, people do engage, as a result, this contract they're paying into, they agree to engage in certain behaviors to keep themselves safe? That's when you start getting into the whole, well, if you can tell them to wear a seatbelt, can you force them to get vaccines? Can you force them to exercise?
Can you make cigarettes illegal?
Exactly.
Like, then it becomes far more. I just see this going less and less and less free.
Of course.
Which for me becomes a huge concern.
Of course. And I think that's where some of the discussion comes in, because you say, well, should we be free to do whatever we want? Well, if therefore physicians and everyone else on the treatment side needs to be free to refuse care to whoever they want, because no one's going to pay for it. But I think that's where some of the thoughts have evolved, because you can't hold a hyper independent perspective and still expect the system to practically work.
Right.
Especially because there are always going to be those of us who end up taking more from the system than we give.
Correct.
And that's, hell, private insurance. Like, right now I've given so much to private insurance and used none of it. That could change tomorrow.
Yep.
And suddenly I could become one of those people completely in the red on their balance sheet. That's part of the risk. Like, how do you prevent that? You can't. There has to be a certain amount of compromise within this social contract.
Right.
And if you stick solely to hyper-independence, it's never going to work. You'll have to abolish almost all government. You'd have to take almost an anarchist perspective.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think that there is, it's anarchy as a whole doesn't work. Not for a system like ours, not for a world system like ours. So you get to a point where you have to have more and more stringent social contracts. And I think I've a lot more, at least sympathetic or understanding now towards more restrictive social contracts. Not that I like them, but I understand why they exist, and I understand why that's a more realistic perspective.
I empathize with that, and I understand that. My concern is from the practical perspective. And listen, we could look at, like, the anarchists on one side, but then I look at the other side, and maybe this isn't the other side, but listen, you go to the DMV, I'm like, holy shit, this is fucking horrible. Like the government, there's one ideal of how we'd like it to run, and then there's the practical side of, oh, this is how it's actually run. And then we could get into people not doing their jobs, corruption. There's so many aspects of a bigger government that scare the living shit out of me.
Absolutely.
In the same way that anarchy scares the living shit out of me, right? Where it's just like every man for himself type thing. So it's what you said is, we need to find a way to have this agreement. We need to compromise. And that compromise is where it appears as though, especially people higher up in government, they're just unwilling to compromise. They're unwilling to find common ground. They're unwilling to give a little bit here and there. I definitely tend to lean more towards the freedom side, just because, and maybe this is just what I've been exposed to, but the idea of having a bigger government that does have more control historically, in general, it just scares the living shit out of me. And it's never mind the idea of just understanding that every time we see a government get more and more control, the corruption inevitably gets out of hand. And then that bleeds down into removal of individual freedoms. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, which is, I think, why it's probably still a debate after God knows how many thousand years of democracy. Because I don't think that, I mean, obviously there's no easy answer. There's no clear place to draw the line.
Right.
Which is why I think it's almost like expecting there to be a clear answer is the unrealistic part.
Yes.
Like, you have to realize
that's so
that
true.
governance and government and political parties and all that, as long as they are allowed freedom to exist, are necessary. We need to have this constant back and forth and being able to try new things and see what doesn't work. And as long as we avoid the two extremes, which would be, I mean, revolution is fine, but as long as we avoid any sort of oppressive authoritarianism, what we have is we essentially have government as a dialogue, constitutions as a living document. These things they are things that should evolve. And they are things that should evolve as we try new things. We go, okay, is this level of restriction acceptable? Yes or no? Like, we have to allow ourselves, but that also brings us even back to the earlier point about true authenticity. We have to admit that this is always going to be a discussion.
So true.
And we have to be flexible to the idea that, hey, I could be wrong on this. I may think this would never work. It might work. I just haven't thought about how it would. Or, hey, I don't want any involvement in this. And then it's pointed out to you that the government's already involved in this. And you go, well, you think about things like, inflation, student loans and all that, and student loan forgiveness is terrible and the government shouldn't do it. And then you realize that in many ways it was the government's support of certain, student loan guarantees that allowed them to be given out so freely, which resulted in, inflation in costs of colleges and all that. So you say, well, the government actually played a role in the creation of the student loan debt. So wouldn't they have a responsibility then to help eliminate it? So just an example of another area where it has to be a dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's, there's a lot of times when people say, well, I stay out of politics, and goes, no, please be part of it. Like, politics is life. Politics is everything that affects all of us. It is our social contract. Please, if you have views, I would rather hear everyone's perspective on the social contract and where it should be, rather than just a few people all the way up top sending out their curated messages. Like, please, everyone, make your viewpoint known. Even if my initial thought is, and probably will be, that's really stupid. At least you're saying it. Like, come on,
That's how you learn. And that's also how we create. Right now, I feel like people feel stifled and as though they can't have dialogue. They don't want to be seen as evil. They don't want to be seen as a bad person. They don't want to be seen as they don't want to be labeled a certain way, and so they just keep their opinions to themselves. And what that leads to is the very vocal minority on either side, essentially speaking for both sides.
Exactly.
Which prevents further discussion. Which is why, like, yes, speak, say what you think, and you can also say, like, listen, I don't know where I fully stand on this, but here are my thoughts right now. Have that conversation. Yeah, completely agree.
Exactly, because the more times that if somebody speaks and their intention is to gain support, they will speak on things that the people around them agree with and that draw divisions between them and others. So you're going to have the people doing the discussion, the people basically putting and controlling the narrative. And my God, we need to talk about this in terms of fitness. But the people controlling the narratives are the ones who are emphasizing the divisions. Yeah. Not the people who are emphasizing the place we need to have discussions. Yeah. And that is so dangerous, because that is literally how you do get authoritarianism, is you get a very, very strong tribal pull, and you get these people whose interest is in widening the gap, not bridging the discussion. That's always going to be the problem.
We're going to make a sharp turn. All right. You said, it's a direct quote, you said, I've been an addict. I've been through an eating disorder that almost killed me. I've been grossly overweight. There was a time when I'd look back at all those versions of me and worry that I'd slip back. I was afraid of the person I was. Now, I don't really know these stories about you. Could you give some insight into your past, the eating disorder, into being overweight, being an addict? I'd just like to hear more about it.
They were all kind of part of the same process, which is how most of these things work. I think, one of the things I've always told people with eating disorders is they don't ever truly go away because it was never about the food. It's always a pattern of thinking. It's a pattern of, it's a way you view yourself. It's a way you view the things you control. It's all part of your personality. And I think a lot of this eating disorder recovery, addiction, like a lot of them are kind of in similar areas psychologically, if not neurologically. I was very active in high school. Not the greatest athlete, but very active. Played pretty much every sport I could imagine. When I went to college, I didn't have any ability to self-start on any of that. I didn't have any organized teams. I didn't have anyone breathing down my throat. I always resisted sports to a certain extent. I resented them a little bit because I felt like I was never very good at any specific one. So I always felt a little bit like I'm out of my element here. I'm being forced to go do this. I'm being forced to go train. No matter how hard I work, I'm never going to be, I'm never going to be first string in football. And I never was. Close my senior year, but that was it. And so I think when I went to college, I kind of forgot about all that. I sort of rebelled. The one thing I did keep up, though, were the eating patterns that had me doing 4 to 5 hours of exercise a day. So I gained, I would say, close to 75, 80 pounds.
Oh, wow.
In about a year and a half. And it showed. It got even more. Yeah. Well, I was 168 in high school and I was close to 250.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, there's some people who say, well, that's not grossly overweight. But when it happens that quickly,
Yeah.
it really was. Like, I mean, talk about, because there's one thing about slowly gaining weight over time and all that, but sort of acclimating to your body a little bit. None of that. I was in horrendous shape, like sleep apnea.
Oh, wow.
Like for years.
Were you binge eating?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't see it that way.
Okay.
I didn't see it that way. I saw it almost as liberation. I would just order myself an entire Domino's deep dish pizza with extra cheese at night with breadsticks on the side, and I would eat until I was stuffed. And there was almost liberty to that because I was like, I'm not on a team anymore. I don't have to be healthy for anything. I can do what I want. So I would do that. I would drink constantly, and I gained a lot of weight. And I hit a point. My things weren't going great for me psychologically at that time for a number of reasons. But then I realized, like, oh, I can't keep doing this. And I don't want to call out who said something because I don't want them to feel bad because it was a very innocent statement, but it really made me rethink where I was at. And I decided, well, no, I'm going to lose this weight again. And so I started very reasonably. I thought I went down to 1 meal a day. I just had my dinner. And then I thought, because my dinner was like a 3,500 calorie pizza. I was like, okay, maybe I can make that a little bit more reasonable. So I went from a big dinner to a small dinner. And as I was losing weight, I went from a small dinner to the most calorie efficient dinner I could have. And then I started cutting out things from that. And then I started out with things like different fat burners. At the time, there were things like lipokinetics, which was, do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Oh, man. So lipokinetics was, you've heard of, oh, God, what is it? Oh, my God, I just drew a blank on it. There's that diet compound that's actually based on, it's an oxidative uncoupler.
I have no idea.
Yeah, there's one. It's still sometimes used in bodybuilding circles. What it actually does is, for all intents and purposes,
It's not ephedrine.
No. Like pokes holes in the electron transport chain. But it's, anybody watching this is going to be like, I know. But yeah,
I guarantee you most people watching this are not going to know
well,
it.
because it was famous for a while because it was a pesticide actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it turns your skin slightly yellow.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and it's actually a really, really potent drug. Hard to get though, and can kill you very easily. You'll just sit there.
Maybe it's a good thing you don't know that.
Oh yeah, you'll just sit there and sweat. It is extremely dangerous. So please, like, if you don't know what it is, don't go find out. But there was some legal versions of it that were very similar. They would literally speed up your metabolism.
Holy shit. And
Yeah.
Where did you get it?
There was one company that was selling it for a while.
Online?
Yeah, it was a legal version of it. And it came in a little like black and yellow capsules. It got taken off the market due to contamination and having some other things in it. But I was popping those. I was taking ephedrine. I was taking other recreational stuff to try to lose as much weight as possible. And so I got down to, I think, 141.
Oh shit.
Yeah. 141 pounds. And I was in this mindset where every place I could refuse a calorie was good. And if I went up a flight of stairs and blacked out, it was good because it meant I was hungry. Because it meant I was heading. See, for me, it was like either I'm heading towards my goal, which is a little bit of this, quote, deprivation / being the most dedicated example of what I want to show myself as. I am no longer this glutton. I am somebody who has absolute, complete self-control over everything. And of course, that comes with self-loathing. You eat too much one day, or I think, my God, wait a minute. If I eat too much at dinner, I am literally taking a step away from my goal. And that was terrifying to me. And I think that's something that's come into play a lot in later reflections on life and goals and everything else. But it was the thought that either I'm getting better at this or I'm getting worse at it. So I need to keep depriving myself and keep depriving myself and keep depriving myself. And I remember I lost muscle control one night.
Oh, jeez.
And when I woke up,
What happened?
lost all bowel control overnight.
Oh, shut up. Oh my gosh.
Electrolytes were so completely off and I could barely stand up. And I was like, okay, this might be something wrong. So sure enough, like electrolytes were extremely low.
Did you go to the ER?
Yeah. Yeah. And they basically said like, hey, obviously they took one look at me and they're like, well, you're very thin. I was like, thank you.
I'm glad you noticed.
Yeah, as a matter of fact. And there was, I remember the guy said that. He's like, you're very thin. I'm like, oh, okay. And but that was part of the mindset at the time. And a part of me was like, oh my God, I don't want to not hear that anymore. But then I was like, all right, well, okay, the whole idea of like, being thin but shitting yourself in your sleep, it's kind of a little bit less cool. So I decided I was going to actually get into the gym because there were people encouraging me to go like lift and work out. And they're like, yeah, dude, you're skinny, but anybody can be skinny. And I was like, you're right. God damn it. Here I thought I was being cool and anybody can do this. Okay, well, I got to do something more challenging. So I started going to the gym. And that obviously became an addiction that's persisted until now. But, it was filled with its own things as well. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to be the best at it. And there was some like early on, like I dabbled with what were probably fake steroids, like right off the bat. It's like, look, little blue pills that somebody was like, here, take these.
Just orals? You just took oral pills?
Oh yeah, I didn't know what I was doing.
That's so funny.
I had no idea what I was. I was scared of needles, man. Plus, I was so skinny. What was I going to do? Like jam them into my femur? Like there was nothing else there. It's like it's subcutaneous or nothing, man. And but there was a lot of that. So I was, I was gonna, I'm gonna gain weight. I'm gonna get really jacked. And oh my God, this is a story I never thought I would tell all that publicly, but I went to New York for a while.
Okay.
And
the city?
Yeah, New York City. And this was after my first graduation from college. And I was in really good shape then. So I thought I was like, because I was still hyper, all about diet and the fat burners, but I was eating more and I was lifting. I was ripped. I got involved in a side gig, which you read between the lines, like I had to stay in good shape for.
Okay.
And recreational drugs, specifically cocaine, was a big part of that lifestyle.
Okay.
So, like anything else, I was like, all right, I'm going to be the best at cocaine that ever was, I guess, or something like that. I don't know what the thought was. I'm like, okay, cool. This is me now. So I became really good at it. I don't know what
at
that
cocaine?
means. Yeah, I was great at it, man. Just top notch. No, but like this was something that really like just part of my personality. This became part of my identity. This whole idea where I've been casting around for this identity. What am I? I was, kind of the smart kid in high school. In college, I was definitely not a very hard worker. I kind of lost my identity. And suddenly I was the skinny guy with super self-control. And then I was the jacked fit guy. And now I was the jacked fit party guy. And everything was just this too much. And that became a very, very serious cocaine addiction. And again, like all these other things, what snapped me out of it was my best friend at the time actually overdosed. I'm sorry. Thankfully, well, he survived.
Oh, good. Okay.
He survived.
Thank God.
This was not an OD that resulted in death, but it did result in him in the hospital. And he was cardioverted. Like this was serious. Like he was having extremely, I mean, he was in there for days. And they were like, yeah, he was really, really close. By the time they got him in, he very easily could have passed away. And it was another one of those wake up calls. I'm going, okay, what am I doing? Maybe being the best at cocaine is not really a thing to be good at. And, that led to another period of time where I was like, wow, what am I going to do? Am I just going to latch on to another addiction? Because when you start to see that pattern in yourself, when you start to see that pattern of, I find something and I react to it. And I react to it by trying to do something completely different. And every common thread throughout all of these things was just this absolute excess. And so a lot of my life has been trying to fight that excess. And I think that's, really like a lot of personal philosophy now, really where a lot of it's come from is realizing that, even when I first started in fitness, there was a lot of excess to it. I need to be the best at this. I need to be the best at everything. I've got something to prove to myself, not anybody else. I want to prove that I am always the person that I think I am. When I, have my little like superhero fantasies in the back of my mind, like I want to be that person,
Yeah.
and I'm the only one who can do it. I'm the only one who can bring that out of myself. And why should I set limitations on myself? I'm going to be the best at it no matter what. But realizing that in and of itself is where so much of that self-harm came from. I didn't get an eating disorder because the magazines were showing me pictures of skinny people. I had an eating disorder because this was something that I took a lot of personal pride in. This was my thing. No one could take it away from me. This was something that I believed was important to me. And it's same thing with all of these things. This was not my identity. This was something that was deeply personal. And that mindset, I've always said that a lot of times people with eating disorders, like if you can redirect that in some positive way, this is actually their positive personality traits that have just gone bad. They've turned to villainy ever so briefly, like please redirect them. And I think that's, it's given me a huge amount. And, people become addicted, they become addicts for a number of different reasons. Drug use after surgery is a big thing, and a lot of other things. There's so many reasons why people become addicts. There's so many reasons why people go through eating disorders. But, I think in a lot of people, especially, again, those with eating disorders and there's that common thread. And then this is something no one can take away from me. And I think it's, in some ways, it's been continuously finding purpose. I've said throughout my life, a lot of things have been trying to find what I want to do and trying to find who I want to be around and what I want to learn, what I want to be when I grow up. I still don't know. Unfortunately, looking at the white hairs here, I'm like, oh my God, I've actually grown up. I should probably have this figured out by now. But it's not figured out. And I think just constantly trying to explore and speak to people and try new things and all that, I hope that never goes away. I think I've tried for so long to try to figure out who I am and what I want to do and what I want to be that I didn't realize that whole journey is literally the answer. And I think that's been the biggest change in my perspective is I don't have to figure out what I want to be because the process of figuring that out it's steered me right so far.
I love that.
Yeah.
What you said, there's a lot that you said that I love, but one of the things going back to eating disorder, which is something I struggled with, and I've been very open about it from wrestling, the weight cutting and all of that. Man, you said it was so poignant the way you just said this. You said it's not a bad trait. It's the trait that found a bad behavior.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's such an important way to frame it because anytime you have a behavior, I shouldn't say anytime for everybody, but for me personally, if I have a behavior that I feel is bad, the shame and guilt that comes with it is overwhelming, especially when, and I relate to you on this, you want to be the best, not compared to anybody else, but because you know that you can be the best. And when you have this shame and guilt because of this behavior, I think it's easy for it to overwhelm you with, well, I am bad. I am bad. I've given into this bad behavior. And then you want to punish yourself. But being able to find that golden nugget of it's actually a really good trait that found a bad behavior and you can redirect it to something good. It makes me think about those evil geniuses, the people who are criminals, who for example, I don't know the guy's actual name, but Leonardo DiCaprio played him in Catch Me If You Can.
Yes.
The guy who's just
I
unbelievably
thought you were going
smart.
to say Megamind, but yeah.
It's like, and people always say, "Oh man, could you imagine if they used that for good? Could you imagine if they used that for good?" And I feel like we all have that in ourselves, especially for anything we're struggling with. Maybe instead of looking at that behavior as bad, look at, well, what trait do you have that you can redirect into something good?
It's, you look at the line between dedication and obsession. And what is it? You look at these tropes that are like, oh, obsessed is the word that the lazy use to describe the dedicated. I mean, but that, like, exactly like you said, like a lot of these things are redirected. And I think a lot of people do have shame with these things because they don't want to hear that this is a personality flaw that has led to this eating, because it's something that is almost central to their being. They go, how do I unlearn this need to have some sort of regulation? How do I unlearn this need to, it's not a need to be in control, but it's a need to say, of all the things in my life right now, I want there to be some stability, something I feel like I'm succeeding in. That's not a bad thing. We all have that.
Yep.
And it's funny because I see this same mindset, which you see it in fitness, and in a lot of cases, it's still lauded in fitness. People always joke, one of the things is you say, oh, well, it's really tough to get this person to take an off day. That is in many ways the same mindset. If I'm not training, I'm getting worse. If I'm not using this thing to regulate my emotions or use this to regulate my energy levels, I'm going to go nuts. It may be harder for them to take a rest day than it is for a very sedentary person to go out for a 5-mile run. And it is that same mindset. It's, in a lot of ways, it's this same need for an area, whether there's this thought that there's some sort of sacrifice or some sort of self-investment that is challenging, that results in an outcome that they believe makes them more of who they want to be. And again, like when you say it that way, you're like, oh, that's not a bad thing. That's good. Like that's dedication. That's like, what makes entrepreneurs and scholars and all that. And you're going, yeah, but it can also lead to eating disorders. Like it's the same thing. And I think it's such a normal human trait. And I think understanding that, and people with eating disorders, people with these, any sort of disordered behavior, I almost hate calling it disordered, but you can call it what you want. People who exhibit those behaviors, it's so important that they understand, like, this is not a desirable outcome, but this is not something you should inherently be ashamed of, because these are potentially very strong personality traits, strong assets, things that could be easily admired to you about you if they were directed in a way that was more self-constructive rather than self-destructive.
Man, that's so true. That is the best way I've heard someone articulate that, and especially to take the shame out of it and be like, hey, listen, like the way that you're built and wired is actually incredible. Yeah. And if we can redirect this into something that's not just positive for you, but positive for society as a whole, like this could lead to massive amounts of success and happiness and fulfillment, as opposed to it being put into a behavior that is causing you fear and destruction and detriment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's funny because I say that almost that self-sacrifice aspect of it is important to people. That a little bit of the sense of suffering, like this is something difficult. That, I think, is the most important thing to redirect, because you can't redirect people towards something that's easy.
Right.
You can't just say, oh, well, now let's focus on having a balanced diet. And you're like, oh, well, that's... All right. Now our goal is going to be to eat a reasonable amount with solid, even portions. And you're going, okay, I'm going to have exactly 178 grams of protein, which means I'm going to be sitting here like dry scooping whey at the end of the day. That can lead to its own
to the gram.
That's why there are people who are like, I used to have an eating disorder. I can't do flexible dieting.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So you go, okay, well, we need to now redirect it somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
And it can be something with self-sacrifice.
Yep.
In fact, in many ways it can be, because there's nothing wrong. There's nothing inherently pathological about somebody who likes inflicting a little amount of discomfort to themselves for a positive outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in many ways, that's part of the human experience.
Yes.
Like we're kind of wired for that to a certain extent. So that itself doesn't have to be negative. I am all about self-love, but I also realize that sometimes people do want to have to suffer a little bit to have an outcome that can be positive. That's okay. Keep that. Find something that's hard. Find something that's difficult, that challenges you, that makes you uncomfortable, but has a positive outcome. I think that's the difference.
All right, we're going to take another sharp turn, okay?
All right. Always down for that.
You're the literal creator of hybrid training. You coined the term in the early 2000s, as far as I'm aware. Is that right?
It was like actually 2009, 2010 was the first time I used it.
Okay.
And then it was in the book, like 2012 to 2015 when the book came out, that it got hyper popular.
Got it. Okay. You're the living, breathing example of an elite hybrid athlete deadlifting over 700 pounds. What's your best deadlift?
We're just going to go by recent numbers. I'm just going to talk recent numbers.
No,
because, like,
best ever.
Best 747.5.
Okay. And what's your recent best?
715.
Oh, 750?
15.
Oh, 715. Okay. I was like, that's better than 747.5. Got it. Okay. So deadlift over 700 pounds. You've run under a 430.
So that, sub 5 was probably my best.
Okay.
The sub 430 was a likely downhill, a little suspect. So
That's still impressive.
it got legs on its own, but we'll say sub 5 at the time was
Sub 5,
what I was doing.
Deadlift over 7, ultra marathons, and far more. But you told me, you said that, quote, hybrid training has been bastardized. I used that word. You didn't say that word, but it's been bastardized and it's become something that it was never meant to be.
Right.
So what's happened?
Popularity.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's happened with hybrid training is it's almost become its own separate thing. There's no, see, the term the hybrid athlete for the book didn't mean that you are a hybrid athlete. It meant that you are an athlete who is doing hybrid things. So it's like saying, the sleepy athlete, the hybrid athlete. Like, okay, this is an athlete who is now currently in the state of training hybrid. Because hybrid, the original idea of hybrid was you are training 2 or more different sports or activities that don't explicitly support each other. And what that means, simply put, is that if I devote time towards training this, it may potentially make me worse, or at the very least, it's not going to help my performance in that. I am a power lifter. I compete in powerlifting. I have a meet in 6 months. I want to run a half marathon. Every time I sit down in the week and look at my training, I have to decide every time I go for a run, it's probably not making me a better powerlifter. That's probably not going to increase my total, but I have to put in some running time. Every time I go lift, it's probably not making me better at my half marathon. So now I am going to be training with a hybrid program so that I can do these 2 different things and still progress in both of them. I don't have to give up my powerlifting because I want to go run a half. I don't have to throw away that thing I really like doing because I want to go try something else. So it's a system that is meant to let athletes who may have deep interest in one thing or deep interest in 3 or 4 or 5 different things to be able to excel and compete or just train in all of them without having to really give anyone up. But now hybrid athlete has become its own thing. Like, you are a hybrid athlete. Everything has to be hybrid. A hybrid athlete is someone who lifts and runs. That's not accurate. You don't have to lift and run. You can be a sprinter who also runs long distance. That's a hybrid program. Obligate sprint training for 100-meter run, it looks very different than a marathon training program. That's sort of it. You can be a sprinter who then wants to do cycling races. I want to go ride a century. That's a hybrid program. In becoming this, it's lifting and running, and now there's hybrid sport, which, by the way, no single sport can be hybrid, because if there's one score and one podium, it's one sport. It's not more than one. Every workout training session is designed to make you better at that final score or final standing. That's not a hybrid program. But now it's it's this combination of you have to run, and you have to it's all about your physique and being strong, and at least who's the best hybrid athlete now, and it's taken on a life of its own. And I think what I object to more than anything else is it's creating an archetype that was never meant to exist. The ideal hybrid athlete, you have no idea what they could look like. They could be a 340-pound pro strongman who's out there running his first 10K. You can be a 115-pound marathon runner who just decides she wants to do a weightlifting meet. And it doesn't matter how much she puts over her head when she gets on the platform the first time. She's a hybrid athlete. The best hybrid athlete does not exist because the best hybrid athlete isn't any one thing. They don't look a certain way. They don't talk a certain way. They don't have interest in certain sports as opposed to others. This is not this archetype right here, this new group you have to join. You don't have to look a certain way or take a certain set of supplements. And like I'm seeing things now, this will support your hybrid lifestyle. What's the best apparel for hybrid athletes? I'm like, what kind of hybrid athlete? I mean, you know, if you're like a powerlifter who's also a cyclist, chances are the best apparel for you is going to be something in spandex that looks absolutely ridiculous. The difference being whether or not you have a chamois on your butt. Like that's the difference between the two sports. So like what is all this stuff? It's creating a new archetype that I think almost becomes more exclusionary than inclusionary, because hybrid was always inclusive. Hybrid was, we don't care what you look like. We don't care what sport you come from. No matter what, you can walk up to another sport, start training in it, and say, I belong here. Doesn't matter. If you are a pro strongman and you do your first cycling race and you look like you ate the last 3 competitors, you're so much bigger than they are, that's fine. You belong there. And if you're training to get better, you are a hybrid athlete. And I think that change, has done a real disservice to the concept, in that by creating this new archetype, it's creating the sense that people have to do certain things to be hybrid. And that wasn't it. The whole fun of hybrid is saying, I want to try something different. What if you lift, but you don't like running? Okay. You can be a power lifter who wants to do rock climbing. That's hybrid. Granted, grip strength is probably going to help you no matter what, but you know, if you're a lightweight power lifter, you'd probably be a very good rock climber at the same time. But still, there's a lot of difference to it. Differences in functional range of motion, certain functional tightness in your bench press that might be a hindrance in your climbing, and things like that.
And just the time associated with the training for the skill of it.
Exactly. A lot of these sports, you need a lot of repetition. Climbing, bouldering, you need a lot of time out there. There's a lot of technique work, a lot of repetition. And honestly, some days after a hard climbing session, your hands and elbows and shoulders may not feel like going and benching heavy the next day. It's just not going to be in the cards. So I think that's the fun of it, is it's meant to be a system that encourages people to be creative and look and say, I don't care what I look like, what my physique is, where I come from, what my sport is, what my interest in. I can look at this whole range of things and say, I want to try that and have it work. That is hybrid right there.
Anybody can be a hybrid
Anybody
athlete.
can be a hybrid athlete. You can also get into the argument of what an athlete is or isn't, which is a debate that I absolutely hate.
It's just like a waste of time.
It's a waste of time because everybody is gatekeeping.
Yes.
Everybody is gatekeeping. And it's honestly, I don't even know if we want to get started.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
What is an athlete? What defines an athlete? Does competition define an athlete? Or is it just a level of proficiency, somebody who trains to improve in a given physically based endeavor? That's pretty much close to the definition of an athlete. How good do you have to be an athlete? Do you have to be on the podium at a national event? What if you are 10th in a local race? At what point do you need to be paid to do it? In which case you're professional. Do amateur athletes not exist? Where is that line? First of all, so is there a line for performance? If you qualify for Boston, but come in 50th percentile in Boston, are you still an athlete? Like where's that line? There is no line. You can't arbitrarily say that your degree of proficiency determines whether or not you're an athlete. Like that just doesn't work. What characteristics do you need as an athlete? Well, there have been a lot of debates on that. People say, well, you need endurance and speed. Okay, how about hand-eye coordination? How about reaction time? How about strategic insight, which certain team sport players have? There are so many different characteristics that are useful in different sort of athletic competition that you can't even say you need to be strong and fast and everything else. And people say, well, powerlifters aren't athletes. Bodybuilders aren't athletes. I love that one. Because the people say, well, your athletic ability doesn't directly determine your standing. Oh, because there's a subjective aspect. Well, so does gymnastics. Obviously, there are certain tricks that have certain awards, but it's, execution, everything. But it's subjective. So the subjectivity of bodybuilding not count? Maybe not. There's certainly athletic ability that goes into training for it. Just because it's a process-oriented system rather than a goal-oriented system doesn't necessarily make it less of an athletic endeavor. I mean, at the end of the day, your ability to execute your training program correctly and put in significant hard work determines your outcome. So is it an athletic pursuit or not? So it's such a murky area that people try to say, oh, well, you're not a hybrid athlete. You're just some guy who runs and lifts.
It's the fucking hybrid.
That's hybrid. It can be. And B, that's an athlete because you're trying to get better at these things. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where people try to create, and there's just no self-awareness. They try to create these lines to stop people from calling themselves athletes without a really ironclad definition that holds up to even the slightest scrutiny. And I think, again, it drives me crazy because it's people trying to create an ideal or create a tribe that they can either belong to or make fun of. We're going to make fun of all the hybrids for being terrible at everything. Okay. Like, you can do that, but
Good for you.
yeah, good for you. We're going to make fun of the fact that they call themselves athletes because they're not. Are they not? Seems like they are to me. Like, even if they're not hybrid, they're certainly athletes.
Yeah.
So I think all of that stuff is just, it's incredibly needlessly divisive.
Yeah.
And I think it's gatekeeping of the worst sort. So
Why do you think, or where do you think it started? Like, is it what led to so much of a change in a hybrid from what you originally intended, and how do you think it has perpetuated and like so invasively?
I think it started out from a good place. I think there were some individuals who did very, very well. Individuals with good physiques, compelling stories, who did very well in a lot of combination events. And I think a lot of them, including good friends of mine, created challenges for them to do. New things to see, like, hey, can I combine this and combine that? Like, that would be fun and all that. And a lot of these individuals, just by virtue of the fact that they're very high performers in a couple of areas, they had good physiques. They were often lifting and running challenges because nobody wants to hear about somebody's, like, century ride challenge. A lot of them were very individual challenges because, it's even the best hybrid athlete is probably not going to come in anything more than about like top 10th percentile in something. So I think it created this subculture of hybrid athletics as sort of a spectacle. Here's a couple of individuals who represent this new archetype. And then things like high rocks came along. And don't get me wrong, I love high rocks. I think it's actually a very, very cool sport. I love the fact that it is, multimodal. It's exciting. A lot of different people can try it. But, again, it's a single sport. It's not really quote unquote hybrid. And it's one very narrow application of it. But I think in high rocks, the individuals who do very well have a certain body type. They're a certain archetype. That you can have individuals who are lean and muscular and strong and, relatively quick who do well in this sport. So again, it created this image. And I think it's because it's a lot more marketable than, I had friends from back in the early hybrid days who were literally like these big bearded strongmen who were happily going out on their mountain bikes and absolutely tearing it up out there. They, bless their hearts, amazing human beings, admirable. They were not nearly as photogenic or marketable as somebody who's got
shredded
and doing these dramatic running photos. I mean, I'm like, even myself, like I go for a run. You look at a race photo, I look like an asthmatic rhinoceros about to die. I'm like, okay, that's not very marketable. So there's a certain amount of that. I think that's what captured the imagination was a lot of these individuals who could lift good weight, had great physiques, were out there running. God knows that tracks training sessions are really great to video because everyone looks dramatic.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good framing on all that. So I think that sort of led to this creation of this archetype that is, it got really popular. And arena events are great to film because you always have dramatic shots.
Right.
So there's a lot of content coming out there from here. And I think that's what really gave it those legs. And like I said, it's fine. All the admiration in the world for all these people, like 0% me here detracting from anything, rather just saying like, that's only one expression and it's one small expression. And it's not that everybody else doing hybrid things needs recognition, but don't tell them what they are and aren't, especially if it's inaccurate. Somebody's an athlete who wants to try something hybrid. They're a hybrid athlete. That's it. Like, let them be that. Let them feel good. Let them feel like they're actually doing something challenging and cool and thumbing their nose at expectations, which has always been part of hybrid. To thumb your nose at expectations, what people think you're capable of. Oh, that big person can't run. That big person can't ride. Oh, look at that skinny person. They'll never be a power lifter. That's always been it. It's always been a way to just think, nope, I'm going to do it.
I think it's one of the greatest contributions you've given to the industry as a whole. Because when I was first getting into it, it was always one modality. This is what you train. This is the only quality you can bring up.
Yeah.
And we were talking before we recorded, and we'll probably get into it at some point today. Talking about the way that the industry has gone in many ways is disappointing and scary in some ways. But I think one of the coolest things for me, and as a direct result of you introducing hybrid and not gatekeeping it and making it inclusive for everybody, is like, for example, in my inner circle, I see women who are 50, 60, 70 years old box jumping. And like for the first time, which is a very scary thing to do.
Yeah.
Like they're going box jumping and then they're running a 5K and then they're like working towards their splits. It's like they're doing everything.
Yeah.
And they love it. And it's the confidence that comes from it, the excitement that comes from it. It's a really wonderful contribution because I think you single-handedly were able to shift the mindset of what is the science-based crowd, which is that crowd which is, there's so much good and so much bad that comes with the crowd, the science-based crowd, the evidence-based crowd, because it's very difficult to change their mind. But I think you shifted it to be like, hey, it's not just one modality. It's not just you. It's not you're just a power lifter. You don't have to just be a runner. You don't have to just be this. Like you could do all of it.
Yeah.
We just need to shift your thinking and your approach to it. And so I think that will go down, I think, as one of your greatest legacies within the industry.
Well, I appreciate that, and like I'll give a huge amount of credit to again other organizations like High Rocks, like CrossFit, for example, and all of them for very much introducing the concept in a very different way and again capturing people's attention, capturing people's minds. And I think all of this has just been it's my privilege to obviously have been part of a shift that I think has just resulted in healthier people.
Yes.
Because a lot of people say, you'll see these discussions, they go, oh, well, that's just always how we used to train. It's just, I'm like, you weren't around in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like people didn't do that.
Yeah.
Even in mid to what are they? The aughts. What do we call the 2000s? The aughts. Does anyone know? People didn't do that. If you were a bodybuilder and you were like, hey, I'm a bodybuilder, I want to go run a 5K, and you'll get two responses. Either, no, that's going to kill your gains. Or people going, yeah, I used to run in the military. I don't do that anymore. Don't. It's going to ruin your knees. That's it. That was the response you got. There was never this thought that, yeah, go for it. And I think that's the biggest difference now is it's like the default. We've come so far now to that being the default that people think that's always how it always was. Mm-hmm. I guess that's some measure of success, right? So
I'm going to drop a bomb on you right now.
All right.
You ready for this one?
Sure.
Why do you hate Maha?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. You just, you know what I think it is? Oh my God, this is where I'm going to be authentic and say, because it's lowest common denominator. Everyone's going to be like, oh. Do you have a set of pearls I can clutch here or something? That would be great. I think what I hate about it is that it preys on fears. You heard of this paradox where very often we tend to overstate things that are a relatively low risk to us and understate the actual risk.
Yes.
I think that it's an entire movement that capitalizes on that. It very much overlooks the things that would be difficult for government to do. It is the biohacking of health policy. We are focusing, hyperfixating on the small things and ignoring the big things. What would improve health in America? I mean, would it be things like, let's just say we had universal access to, quality prenatal screening for everyone who is pregnant and easily accessible healthcare and nutrition plans. And let's expand SNAP to include more food that, individuals could actually live on. You could say what you want. Let's expand rural access to quality healthcare. Okay. All these things would do tremendous amounts to improve health. Instead, we're talking about let's get the high fructose corn syrup out of soda. Like, let's switch the sugar we're using. Let's ban some food dyes because and that's the high profile stuff. That's the stuff where you're going, okay, look, that's not all they're doing. Okay. Like there's a lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes. This is me hand waving. That might in fact be positive, but I think it's this drive to have headline driven health policy where it's about driving what sounds exciting and doesn't take that much work because it's low consequence. Nobody has to really sacrifice much to make these changes. And, honestly, for better or for worse, I think some of the individuals in charge have in the past shown a financial conflict of interest with certain things, like, for example, vaccinations, universal vaccinations, vaccine policy. I think there always has to be the question when you have somebody making policy who's saying, hey, we just want more tests on vaccine safety and efficacy. I'm just asking questions. How often do you hear someone say, well, I'm just asking questions, as a very concealed way to sow seeds of doubt? Mm-hmm. You know, if I accuse somebody of something and I go, hey, have you murdered any puppies lately?
I'm just asking questions.
I'm just asking questions, man. I don't know. I mean, not that you look like a puppy murderer. You might be a puppy murderer. I don't know. Just asking questions. You know, I think that's one of the problems here, is that just saying things like, well, we don't know enough about vaccine safety. Well, in many cases we do. Like, it's pretty extensive. Yes. Do I believe there were certain missteps made in the unveiling of the COVID vaccine? Absolutely. Do I think we undermined a lot of public confidence in vaccines and vaccine policy through heavy-handed and possibly premature decisions made? Then yes, absolutely do. Do I think that means we need to put up more barriers to the development of and distribution of life-saving vaccines? Absolutely not. And I think that's been the problem. That's why I hate MAHA. It's ignoring the areas that would actually make us healthy, or paying lip service to them, and instead moving around a lot of pieces that don't matter so people feel like something is being done. All of these policies get implemented, and the difference to public health would be minimal. In fact, in some cases, a lot of the just asking questions may actually put up barriers to care and further development that may actually be net harmful. So I think it's headline and policy driven and not science driven.
Isn't that the story of social media? It's like everything is headline driven. Everything, like just the most views and likes and clicks, and then it essentially creates the most division among people.
Absolutely. It is so incredibly easy to say that X compound causes cancer. I said, did you know that actually Blue 12 actually does cause cancer in lab rats? I don't even know what Blue 12 is. I just made that up. But like,
you're so convincing.
But people would be like, oh, did you know that? Yeah, Blue 12. And that's actually used in the capsules in certain medications. All these drug companies are pushing a cancer-causing compound in their medications. Why? Because guess what? Blue 12 is made by DuPont. That sounds plausible. I just pulled all that shit out of my ass. Like, none of it's true, but it sounds plausible. And suddenly I've just created something that has a lot of people going, man, this Blue 12 in my medication.
Yeah.
No, it's called Blue 3 now. There's so many different ways to get attention for a cause. Donate to me because I am helping combat the use of deadly dyes in life-saving medications. That's going to stick.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult to that person when you hear that enough, and there's one or two headlines out there that may actually seem to reinforce that, certain food dyes that might, in fact, have some risk at very high doses. They could already have been banned, but that's not the point. The point is that, well, the government approved these once, so what makes you think they're not hiding data on the other ones that they haven't banned? It's all this creation of distrust. And creation of distrust for the sole purpose of keeping people distrustful, so that they will keep looking to you to help them. They will keep supporting you and keep giving you money and keep giving you time and attention and headlines to allow you to remain in that position where you can influence policy. That's the risk. That is the headline based. You can just keep asking questions, and you don't need a lot of evidence. All you need is like one study, doesn't matter how badly conducted it was, to say, maybe we should take a look at that, rather than look at all the reams of data on things like, early access to healthcare and, the possible reworking of, some of the food distribution system to eliminate food deserts in the inner city and, things like that. Okay. Yeah, that would be nice. Expensive though. We don't like expensive. Unless it's like, the latest round of F-35s or something.
I think what contributes to a lot of this headline activism, people don't understand how science works. They don't understand how studies work. And let's say you made up Blue 12, but like we could look at whether it's aspartame or seed oils or whatever it is and say like, well, look, this is what happened with these rats. It gave these rats cancer. It's like, and people hear that and it makes a hell of a headline, and it's fucking scary to your point, which is it's fear-based.
Yeah.
But then when you break it down, okay, well, number one, how much was given to them? In what period of time? Has this been seen in humans? Like, because rats are not humans, humans are not rats. Like, we have very different metabolic processes. I think it's easy for people to, even for realistically, and doing my best to be as kind as possible, as well-intentioned people, they misinterpret what the science actually is showing.
Yeah.
And they might look at a study and say, well, look at what this study says, but they don't understand why that study was flawed in so many different ways. I think the average person doesn't understand that science isn't perfect, that researchers are humans. They make mistakes. There are a number of confounding variables that can affect how a study is done. I think people are very often shocked to know that some studies are just fucking horrible in general. Like, the entire study design is terrible, and here's why. And so it's easy just to look at a headline and say, wow, this gave rats cancer, and then not understand that the study was poorly done and it has no actual effect on practical daily life for the individual. And then leading into these food dyes, there are just flat out lies as well, which is, for me, that's the worst part, when there's a flat out lie. Like, well, these are banned in Europe. It's like, no, they're not. They have a different name. It's and that for me is, I try and do my best to be as giving as possible and to not make out someone to be evil or that they're doing something deliberately to mislead. But that for me is something that's a lie. I'm like, was that a mistake that now you're just digging your heels in, that you're not willing to say, oh, by the way, like, these aren't banned, they just a different name. I haven't seen anyone do that. That leads me to believe that there's actual ill intent, which is very discouraging, because it's just not true. And if you can't say that you just are in the pursuit of truth while also lying through your teeth about something that you know isn't accurate.
Yeah. And I think there's, obviously there's a certain amount of confirmation bias in there. If you believe in a certain thing, you believe a certain category of things is dangerous, you're going to latch on to anything that seems to back up your point. But I think a lot of it, and like you said, because there are a couple things, like a scientific study is not meant to be a final treatise on a subject. Scientific papers, if you look at the whole body of scientific research, you're looking at, like posters, you're looking at debates, you're looking at forums, you're looking at research, like published research, it's all considered scientific communication, which means by definition, it's a dialogue. If I publish research, I consider that communication. I consider this a way of communicating what I'm working on. It's not meant to give you answers. No, not too many scientists are going to say, I want to study this so I can give people a final answer. They're saying, here's an interesting discussion on this topic. I'm going to do some original research that adds to this discussion. That's the point of research. For someone to then take that research and go, look, here's an answer, that's misinterpreting the entire purpose of published research in most cases. So when you think of papers as communication, and you think, like, for example, there are some things that, for example, will show like an increase in the type of certain cancers in lab rats. But when you look at the study, you realize that this is actually a kind of cancer that these rats are genetically predisposed to have, so that scientists can examine the rates, like different rates of tumor development, speed of tumor development, likelihood of tumor development, and all that based on certain compounds or certain interventions. These rats were probably going to get cancer anyway. What the study is determining was, hey, does something that raises the level of this hormone make this type of cancer more prevalent? Which could give us some sort of interesting addition to the dialogue in, if you have this kind of cancer, will something that does this potentially make it worse? Interesting to know. It doesn't mean that that thing is going to give you cancer, even though it may have increased the rate of it in these rats. And I think all of that stuff is misinterpreted so often by people who may, I hate to say it, but they may be well-meaning. They have so much confirmation bias in that they want to find something that they're going to look at that and go, see, smoking gun right there. And I think where the dishonesty comes in is a little bit of they don't know what they don't know. They're not going to think to ask, wait, is this true? Is this accurate? They're just going to do it. They're just going to publish it. And they're going to say, look, here it is. This is the smoking gun I've been looking for. 50% increase. Of course, what they didn't actually say is actually a 0.5 like Pearson coefficient, which is something else entirely. But 50% increase in this type of cancer, and here you go. You shouldn't take this or you shouldn't eat this. Well-intentioned, maybe, but ignorant. And I say that in every meaning of the word, because ignorance, I guess that brings up the question, does ignorance have malice to it?
It can.
It
I think
can.
it depends on the individual. I think it depends on where they find themselves in terms of it's one thing to be ignorant but have no impact on anyone else's life. It's another thing to be ignorant in a very high power position with massive amounts of impact on people's lives, and then to be willfully ignorant. I think if you reach, and I don't know where this line is, if you are being willfully ignorant, and when I say that, defining willfully ignorant, it's that you're refusing to look at other avenues or other reasons or other causes, and you're if you're in a very high position of power, like the Secretary of Health, for example, you have to be aware of your cognitive biases. You have to. If you've gotten to that level, I shouldn't say you have to because obviously someone isn't, but you should be. You should be. And if you're not challenging yourself to look at things from all sides, and then you're inviting influencers in on social media who are pushing just the same narrative that you have, it's whether it's ignorant or not, it's completely inappropriate, and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's dangerous at best.
There's this really interesting thing, like the whole ultracrepidarian, like U-shaped curve. So, the whole ultracrepidarianism, if you have deep knowledge in one area and consider yourself very smart and a great authority, you believe that you therefore know a lot about nearly anything else you're presented with. And, the whole thing is, like when, not that I'm not calling anyone out here, but like, you have a doctor who's talking down to their mechanic about something that's wrong with their car. And the doctor's like, well, I'm educated. The mechanic goes, yeah, but you don't know anything about cars. There's this kind of inverted U-shaped curve where somebody who has deep knowledge in one area may be acutely aware of other areas in their field that they don't know anything about. And they may go, oh, yeah, like I'm a specialist in this area. I don't know too much about that side of things. And they're very willing to admit that because they know what they don't know. Then you get them a little way into like fields that are slightly adjacent. Well, I'm a theoretical physicist, so I should therefore like understand this thing with like mechanics. All of a sudden their perceived expertise goes way up. Or they are a lawyer who's done a lot of work in health-related cases. They believe that they know a lot, and so their feeling of expertise in a very broad-ranging area explodes. And then when you get even further away, it goes back down. Because it goes from I know what I don't know to I don't know what I don't know to I don't know anything. And I think the safest part is when they don't know anything. Because so you get a lot of people who, again, have deep knowledge in one area, law, medicine, whatever else, and then immediately extrapolate that to other areas. And they think sometimes being able to read a paper and not understand it isn't a sign that you're not smart. It's not a sign that you're not educated. It's a sign that you may not know the inner workings of the processes, like the error levels of some of the assessments that are done, the type of rat strain that's being used for the study. Like these are nuances that are very difficult to understand if you don't work in the area.
Right.
But you have a lot of people thinking, well, I can understand this. I can understand every word. Therefore, I am qualified to interpret this. It's dangerous.
Even the thought that you brought up, the idea that maybe this type of rat is more predisposed to that type of cancer. They were going to get that cancer anyway. We were just looking at how quickly it sped up. That's a type of nuance that, number one, I haven't even thought of.
Yeah.
But it's like that doesn't go into the headline. That often won't even go in the story. It's just gonna be like these rats got this cancer and this thing is bad.
Yeah.
It's like but there are so many other factors that come to it. So I think that perfectly exemplifies it. You had said both today and I think it was yesterday as well. You said science has lost our trust, and you brought up issues with how you think COVID went and how the vaccine was rolled out. Why do you think science has lost our trust?
I think we did, scientific communicators, lose a lot of trust in COVID because I think we tried to use science to exert social pressure. And to a certain extent, that's understandable. Shame is a very powerful tool, and shaming people who didn't get a vaccine or shaming people who weren't staying home. I think that made it into, unfortunately, I think a lot of it made it into almost a class war. Because, like, for example, during COVID, I think one of the really crucial things to matter was when COVID started, I moved out to a town that was much, much smaller. This was no longer an urban downtown. Everybody had small businesses. And you told people they had to shut down for several months. and they couldn't bring people in. Essential businesses could. The grocery store was open, but their small store wasn't. A lot of these people,
A lot of liquor stores were told they were essential, which I think was wild.
right?
That was
I think like strip clubs were as well, and like other things like that. And you're like, because I think if they serve, I don't know what it was, if they serve like liquor, if there was some weird workaround.
Yeah.
Because
this is why I struggle with big government, because it's like stuff like that is just fucking stupid.
Well, it is. It is. And it's a product of, lobbying, and this group had
Yes.
the right influence and all
Yes.
that. And you can buy influence, which really brings down to the fact that pretty much every division between people is between like, the wealthy elite and the not so wealthy elite. But
Yeah.
But part of the problem was for a lot of these small businesses, they shut down for more than 2 weeks. They might fold.
Yes.
And so you're telling people, well, if you go in, you could get sick. Do you want to have a hospital? And they're going, if I close my business for 3 months, I don't have any money. I don't have any food. I don't have any health care. My business loses everything. I lose everything. What's the point of living at that point if I'm literally destitute?
Yeah.
And so they felt that they had people saying, well, yeah, you have to do this. And if you want to reopen, you have to take the vaccine. And that's the only way you're going to survive. At that point, it suddenly became an issue of already trusting or not trusting that the government had your best interest in mind.
Yeah.
And presenting, like, it was very one-sided. We were hearing, because any emergency response is the product of a lot of different actors. You have your health experts, you have your economic experts, you have your social experts, you have a lot of people in a lot of different areas coming together to say, let's come up with a plan. This is one area where I think the health experts, public health, especially infectious disease, had a disproportionate influence on the outcome. Because there were a lot of people in the social sciences who were saying this level of isolation could be lethal. There had a lot of people in economics saying the number of years of life as a country that we will lose due to lost productivity, suicides, everything else.
Which went up. Dramatically.
And they're saying, like, it's hard equations, but somebody, and this sounds really harsh, but if people are familiar with this, they'll know that it's not intended to be cold. If somebody is 81 years old, the number of lost years of life, if they pass away, never saying that
it's okay. We're not
that it's
saying
okay.
that, yeah.
Not saying that in the least, but saying that that's very different than if somebody who is like 35
Yes.
either dies or goes into like drug abuse and whatnot, and it's all that. So it's basically saying that when you do that equation, that isolation, did it actually help? Probably not in that regard. One way of looking at it, but that's why you have multiple ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
So I think that was very much a catalyst for the resurgence in a lot of distrust. We already went through vaccines causing autism. We already went through a lot of these things. We already went through, Big Sugar, which by the way is a prison name. I don't care what anyone says. That's someone's prison name. Big Sugar wants us all sick.
That is a prison name.
It's totally a prison name. Big Sugar wants us all sick. Big Pharma thinks there's more money in treating illness than there is in curing it, which is not true. All of that stuff is coming together and basically saying that, okay, there was already distrust. Now we've just amplified it. Because in addition, a lot of people who are, this sounds harsh, but lower level scientific communicators, like, not the Surgeon General, not the head of public health or anything else, but people who are just like community scientific communicators, like people on Instagram or whatever else, they were saying, yes, they were repeating the lines that were being stated by the top. You have to have this, stay home or everyone dies and blah, blah, blah. And I think when some of the questions came out that maybe there was some nuance missing in that response, I think a lot of people who were already predisposed to not trust science, especially people in certain populations, certain groups that were economically more impacted by this, who didn't have the ability to go on unemployment, who didn't have the ability to, suddenly they were really hurt.
Yeah.
So they were hurt. They were angry. They were destitute. They saw government overreach, potentially ruining their careers. And they said, the government hates us. And these scientists are full of crap. And I think that was, we already had, questioning science and questioning experts has always been a thing. But I think that was a real inflection point.
Yeah.
Where I think a lot of people, especially in the wellness industry and everything else and anti-pharma and all that, got very emboldened by it. So I think that was a real turning point. I think it's persisted.
I think that is 100% accurate. I completely agree with everything you said. I think going back to early on, you were talking about shame, and you said shame is a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
Here's my thing, and I saw a lot of this in the fitness industry. Anyone in the fitness industry who understands the research around shame, which is becoming more and more common nowadays, we're understanding you shouldn't shaming someone into losing weight is a horrible idea for many different reasons. We understand that. But some of the loudest proponents of shame being a poor tool to initiate change were some of the biggest shamers in this regard. And so just absolutely tearing people down, shaming them, saying you should you shouldn't be treated at a hospital if you get sick, it struck a chord with me to see people who otherwise understand that shame is a horrible tool to initiate change or to elicit change were now all of a sudden resorting to shame in this scenario. And I think a lot of it was media driven. A lot of it, I mean, there was, it is, sometimes I'll just go back and I'll look at news and media coverage from that time. And I'm just like, man, they said this with all the chutzpah in the world. They said this as though it was fact. And maybe that's what they were told. Maybe that's what they were led to believe. I don't know. But some of the coverage back then, looking back now, it's like, it looks as though it was a straight up lie. Yeah. And then even regardless of what anyone thinks of Joe Rogan, he's one of the biggest podcasters in the world. And even they took one of his videos on, I believe it was CNN, like one of these mainstream media outlets, they like discolored it to make him look sick when he got COVID. Right. And they deliberately altered how he looked. And I don't want to get sued. I don't know if it was CNN. One of these media outlets did it. There was, I think, all of these changes to try and, number one, shame people. And then the other one, actually, this was one of the biggest ones for me, and I'm sure you as well. I have many friends who are nurses and doctors, whatever, firefighters, people who were at the front lines at the beginning of COVID who were getting sick, risking getting sick, fighting to try and help people, these frontline workers. If they weren't willing to get the vaccine, now all of a sudden they're fired from their job. That was a terrible move. Yeah. And I think all of that, in addition to everything you said, led to a tremendous amount of distrust in science, which has now gone too far. Yeah. Right. Which is now, it's like it's actually causing way more harm because of the much of the poor response that initiated with COVID.
Yeah. And I mean, trust is one of those things that takes a lifetime to build and it takes a minute to lose. Yeah. And I think once that started happening, once that erosion started happening, trusted voices were no longer trusted voices. And, I think that it's interesting talking about the shame thing, because I think it really illustrates that a lot of people are bullies. Yeah. If you let it, and they may hide it. They may tell everyone, they may be the most anti-bullying person there is until they feel that they are justified in attacking a certain target. People wonder, and I don't want to get too deep on this or sound like I'm being flippant about anything, but people often wonder how many atrocities get committed by people who believe they are inflicting or wreaking righteous vengeance or punishing those who deserve to be punished. And that can be justified to any extent. I mean, you see it now, you see it all over the place. We
saw it with the United Healthcare guy who was murdered in cold blood. But I see people supporting it and people in the comment section being like, he deserved it. Like, that's
right. And it's like, so is murder okay if we determine that this person deserves to be murdered? And it's like, you asking that question, no matter what side you stand on it, do I think that many private healthcare companies are absolutely... Look, I just had an issue with a private healthcare company myself that had me absolutely enraged and ready to go down there and physically throttle everybody from the CEO down to the last person on the call. Not the last person I spoke to on the phone. She was really nice. She gets a pass. But everyone else is going to be throttled. But that's... At the same time, I realized that's maybe not the answer. Like, where's the line there? Yeah. Am I willing to now go out and physically throttle individuals because I think that they are valid targets? And as soon as I say yes to that, you're going, okay, so then a lot of these morals, everything on anti-bullying and kindness to others and don't shame others and all that only applies as long as you think that the person is okay. That they, like as long as they're a good person. If you don't like the person, all bets are off. Yeah. Or if they belong to a group that you don't like.
Now that rule doesn't apply.
The rule doesn't apply. It's amazing the mental gymnastics that you can see people go through these days in judging people on immutable characteristics. Gender, race, whatever else still exists to this day where you feel free to bully a group of people because of an immutable characteristic and you can justify it. It's wild.
Yeah, it's insane.
But Yeah, so I think that using shame from people who didn't, by people who didn't have all the information. You had scientific communicators who were repeating lines. Like, for example, I was actually a subject in one of the COVID vaccine trials.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I was on the Moderna trial.
Okay.
I was test subject number whatever, 1,000. And so, yeah, I was part of it. I read the whole protocol. They had an early database closure. It was supposed to be a 720-day study to look at long-term immunity and long-term side effects and everything else. It got closed after how many months? Now, you can do an early database closure. Like, we have plenty of data. We can get this approved. It's emergency. But they flat out did stop the trial without any long-term safety or efficacy data because their protocol called for 2 years of data collection. All that got thrown away.
Why?
Because they wanted to get early approval so that they could start releasing it. Now, obviously, at the time, it didn't seem like a bad idea. They're like, hey, look, it's proven to be effective. We're not going to wait for 2 years for this pandemic to keep going. Nobody knew what the pandemic was going to do. Nobody knew which way it was going to go. So like, okay, they made the decision to release it early. But then some of them were flat out denying. They were like, well, people would say, well, is there any long-term safety or efficacy? Like, do we know? They're going, no, it's fine. It's great. It's approved. It's good. It's effective. No acknowledgement of the fact that, yeah, actually we closed the databases early and we don't have any long-term data. That undermines trust because it's counterfactual.
Correct. It's just not true.
It's not true. It's not true. It was a very valid concern.
Yeah.
Hey, we don't have any long-term safety or efficacy data. We don't know if you're going to have to get a shot every 6 months. You're right. We don't. We don't. Like, yeah, it's, there are certainly some side effects. We don't know what the side effects are going to be 3 or 4 months later because we only have 3 months of data. Oops. Okay.
Just say that.
Just say that.
Yeah.
Say that. That's literally informed consent. And I think that's what a lot of people objected to is they're like, well, the U.S. population became test subjects.
Yes.
To a certain extent they did, just with no informed consent.
Yes.
Instead, mandated. You have to take this. Not only are you not signing an informed consent that says, hey, I realize this could be risky, you're being told you have to do it to keep your job.
Yeah.
You can get into the whole argument as to whether or not it was a net positive. I think it was.
Okay.
Honestly, I do think that the vaccine strategy probably saved more lives. And, I've had COVID. I had the vaccine too, so go figure. But, I think there are people who have long-term issues from the vaccine. I think that's factual. Do I think that would have been worse if they had COVID? I also think so, yes. So I think net it was a positive. Do I agree with how it was unveiled and the regulations and everything else? Absolutely not. So
it's such a tough question because it's, as you said, there's so many ways to look at one thing, right? I don't know if I can say whether or not I agree with whether the net positive or negative, and I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but it's almost just like there are so many different ways we can look at it. It's hard to quantify what makes it net positive or net negative, looking at whether it was, obviously if you look at suicide rates, net negative. If we look at number of people who were saved as a result of it, net positive. But then like specific saved in terms of COVID, but then what are the downstream effects of school closures, not being in school, like to all the children who are like online studying, the negative effects of not being in a classroom, not getting the socialization, not being able to be in a structured environment, like missing out on their senior years or what, high school, college, what, like which way are we looking at it?
Yeah.
And that's where I struggle to be like, yeah, net positive, net negative, because depending on who it affected, that's really what it boils down to. Yeah. For some people, it was definitely a net positive. For other people, who it was a net positive? We could even look in the fitness industry. It was a net negative for gym owners, who I'm sure many of whom lost their entire business.
Yep.
It was a net positive for online fitness coaches.
Yep.
Who now all of a sudden it's like people weren't able to go to the gym. It's like, great. If you already had your online fitness business ready, the first 2 weeks as like around like March 15th, 2020, saw a big drop in the inner circle because people were losing their jobs. Things were getting shut down. They were scared. After 2 weeks, shot right up.
Yep.
Because now people are like, all right, like we're going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
I've been eating like shit for 2 weeks. Time to get back on it. So in the same industry, you have net positive and net negative. It's just there are so many different ways to look at it. And I only think the way that we'll know, like, I don't know if we'll ever truly know at legit, like if we can quantify net positive and net negative. But I do think that over time, through history and through analyzing, we'll be able to be like, okay, this was either a net positive or a net negative.
Yeah.
But I think it really is going to depend who you ask. Like for the people who weren't able to say goodbye to their loved ones, who like weren't allowed to go into the hospital to say goodbye,
You'll never get that
of
back.
whom like that's a net negative. And on the other hand, there were people who had a positive experience. So it's very difficult to quantify.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is. It's going to be on who you ask. So that's why the only thing you can hope for when you look at these things is you go, was this a net positive or net negative? I don't know. Do you feel like you were lied to? Do you feel like you were manipulated into acting one way or another? Mm-hmm. That is the death knell.
Yeah.
Because I think
that's exactly right.
If people felt that there was honesty throughout and honest communication, I don't feel like there would be as much resentment. I really don't.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And if that's not just a metaphor for life in general.
Right.
Just like.
And yet we all do it, though.
Yes.
We all still somehow like double down or don't communicate or all that. And we're like, well, everyone says it makes it worse, but I'll get away with it this time.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
You and I were talking before we started recording about something that I found really interesting. You were talking about AI language models functioning almost like social media to drive engagement. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting. And full disclosure, I'm actually working with a company now on
No way.
Well, I'm not doing any of the coding, but like actually working with a company on some programming for an AI coach, essentially.
Oh, yeah. That's super cool.
It's really cool. And I'll probably talk more about it at some point. I don't know if we're like NDA or anything right now. So I can say, though, that what the company is using is it's using essentially like these language models, integrating a lot of different health information to give more customized programs and all that. So full disclosure, I will say that I do have some interest, of course, in AI development and all that. But I will say one of the criticisms of the use of AI for things like therapy, for example, and I think we've all seen the headlines at this point of they even tested, I was reading an article where they tested a bunch of different therapy models. And what was interesting was one of the therapy models decided to tell a guy that his way to get over his anger at some company or like his old boss was to eliminate everybody on the board of directors. And he was basically giving advice on like how to hide bodies and everything else.
Stop.
And this was a therapy model. And the reason why it does that is because so much of the language model and its training and what it's looking at is designed based on an overall, I know I say media influence, but an overall aggregate informational entity that is based on continuing engagement. It is based on continuing conversations and realizing that giving people a little bit of positive feedback and being a little, sycophantic and telling people a little bit of what they want to hear keeps them engaged. And a lot of AI chat models have been designed to keep people engaged. And what that means is that as soon as something is designed to keep you engaged, it loses the ability to be honest. So very often they don't tell you uncomfortable truths. They won't shut down uncomfortable ideas. They don't want you to just shut off. They don't want to say, I can't do that. I can't do that. Or like, this is a bad idea. So by virtue of the fact that they are essentially trained on some level of customer service and engagement ruins their ability to be objective. A little bit as we were talking about with social media is that the need to maintain engagement is based on highlighting the most ludicrous things. It's based on finding either pain points or things that people vehemently agree with. Neither one is good for presenting nuanced answers to individuals. If you want to keep them engaged, you say something that's either making them very happy or very upset. AI models don't want to make people very upset. So they're going to say things that make people very happy. And that's been a certain problem is that people who are like, yes, my chatbot is my best friend. I'm going,
that's a problem.
That's a problem. That's a problem. And that's growing, actually.
Yeah, it is.
You look
relationships with it.
People with AI relationships.
Dude,
I'm like,
it's
oh
really
my God.
bad.
Yeah, like, hey, look, I'm so happy that they found their person.
But it's not a person.
But it's not it's not a person. It's
Yeah.
literally designed in many ways to tell you a little bit of what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of this also goes into the whole like toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And how that's such a big thing. Cut all the negative people out in your life. You just mean people who challenge you, or do you mean actually negative people? I like this relationship with my chatbot. Well, yeah, it's because it doesn't have any needs of its own. It's very
the most selfish thing.
Oh my God. It is so easy to sound empathetic when the person you're speaking to has no needs whatsoever.
Yeah, that's
like,
so true.
What if your chatbot just woke up one day or you sat down and it's like, I don't feel like talking right now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I no longer have the equipment to handle this level of rejection from my AI chatbot. Actually, that'd be really funny.
I'm tired of you. I need just quiet.
If you were so insufferable that your AI chatbot lover broke up with you. Like, oh, that's a new low. But that's kind of it, is anything that has that sort of design, no internal thoughts of
Yeah.
its own, no internal preferences or anything else. It does wonders to reduce human empathy. The ability to continuously be challenged, the ability to have your ideas shot down, or to be, have somebody say, oh, this is a really stupid idea, or, this is not a good line of thinking. That's difficult, but that's the level of that's how humans are wired. We need that level of challenge. That's why you leave people on their own. They go absolutely insane. So, yeah, I thought that was kind of how much of an issue this is going to be over time.
Yeah.
Who knows? Like, they're already taking steps like GPT-5 is much less agreeable, apparently.
Yeah.
Everyone's in uproar about it. But, they're already taking steps to try to wean that out of it. But at the end of the day, like, is this just going to be a limit of the language model based on our overall volume of media that they're training on that are designed for engagement? As long as that's the truth, as long as that's always been the reality, I think we're always going to have this issue.
Yeah, it's this is a complete unknown. Like, we just have no idea where it's going, and it's very scary. I mean, there are obviously some really wonderful sides of it as well, but it is scary. And I think about it from when you had brought up that these language models are specifically designed for engagement. I hadn't considered it from that perspective.
Yeah.
But that's obvious when we're talking about things like social media. They're doing whatever they can to keep your eyes on the screen because it's a business, and that's where they're going to get their advertising dollars from. I would imagine that's what we're going to start seeing with AI is whatever you can do to keep their eyes inside their app and their chatbot for as long as possible. That's how they're going to make money.
And what's driving speculation right now? If this company is like, hey, we had 10 billion lines of inquiries last month, 20 billion sounds even better when you're trying to sell the service.
Yeah.
And if people are one and done, that's not helping you
That's
reach that 20
exactly
billion.
right. Yeah.
It's a very real problem.
Yeah.
And, like you said, it's a complete unknown.
I hadn't even considered that aspect of it, which is really scary because I thought that I had really been thinking about it a lot, looking into a lot. For me to not even have considered the language model being specifically designed to keep you on their screen longer, it's fucking scary.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is. I think especially when you realize that to a certain extent, and not taking anything away from the AI developers because they're infinitely smarter in
Oh
this
my
area
God,
than
they're
I will ever be.
geniuses. It's incredible.
Oh God, I'm talking to this one guy who's part of this company. He's like, I don't know, he's like 21 or something. He's already had X number of like $1 million in different companies he's helped found, and
Dear
is
Lord.
like, he's at all these conferences. And I love the kid to death, but he's very obviously a kid.
Yeah.
But he's like rubbing shoulders with people who are 30 years his senior, who are experts in the field, and he's like lecturing them. I'm going, oh my God,
Holy shit.
how to feel like an underachiever. But I think to a certain extent, though, they're obviously not 100% aware of where every bit of information is coming from. There are often outcomes that they can't predict by virtue of the fact that it is actually an evolving model of evolving complexity. So there, like you said, there are consequences that we don't really know what they're going to be yet.
Yeah. Well, I told you before we started recording, I wanted to dive into this, and you had at least one really great post on it that we'll see where it goes. You spent a decade in drug development. First, can you talk about what that means? Like, what does a decade in drug development mean for someone who doesn't understand that?
Sure.
And I would love to dive into what does the average person not understand about how drugs make their way into clinical trials, drug patents, how those work, big pharma, if we're talking about more conspiracies and whatnot. I think you have really unique insight into this, having been in the drug industry for a decade, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
So where I came at it more was from working with contract research organizations. So for those people who aren't familiar, like a pharmaceutical company is responsible for a lot of things involving drug development. Pharmaceutical companies don't just have a team of scientists who sit there in labs and try to make up new chemicals and new compounds. Pharmaceuticals are often involved in finding labs or finding scientists working on a particular product. They find an interesting biotech here. A lot of small biotechs, like 2-3 person drug companies, people who discover a new compound, they're looking to get acquired. They develop, you're doing your graduate school work and you find an interesting new compound and you study it for a while. You work with a couple other scientists and you go, wow, this could be a big drug. We don't have the money to develop it. We're going to run this through a couple of preliminary trials, show some promising preclinical data, which is like rat research and all that, and hope that Novartis is going to look at this and go, oh, that's a good drug. We'll pay you guys $30 million for your development plan. Great. That's how a lot of drugs start out. So then the pharmaceutical company basically becomes a corporation that doesn't necessarily do the drug development itself. It looks for promising drugs, finds them, brings them in, gets them through the approval process, and finds the companies who will then produce the drug, and they look out for the patents and they do the marketing and the sales and all that. They're basically almost that like central hub in the process of drug development. The drug development process and the actual clinical trial process, you have a compound that you're interested in producing or that you're interested in investigating. You run it through a series of human trials. You get all the paperwork done and all the approvals and all the evidence over to the FDA or whatever, or the body that you want to look at it, and it gets approved. That is a very resource-intensive role. And depending on the drug, you may need a lot more people involved in that from 1 month to the next. You're a big pharmaceutical company with 500 different compounds in development. Your personnel needs may be huge. They may be tiny 1 month and next. So they hired third-party companies to actually do the drug management. These are contract research organizations. That's what I worked for initially.
Okay.
So what they do is a large pharma would come to us, or sometimes a smaller one, and say, hey, we have this drug that we need to investigate. And what my company would do is we would take the preclinical data for the drug. We would put together some of the INDs, all the paperwork and all that, present it to the agency, government agency, and say, hey, we want to investigate the drug. Here is the protocol for this particular clinical trial. Here's all the ethical considerations. Here's the drug. Here's what it's going to do. Here's what we think it's going to do. Here's what we want to find out. Will you approve it? The agency says, yes, go ahead, run the trial. Or the agency says, no, we've got some issues, in which case we take back the protocol and go, we should make some changes to that. That's basically grossly oversimplified, but that's basically what it is. So in that process though, so that's kind of what we go through at every different phase, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And phase 1 is basically for, first in humans, basically if we give this to somebody, phase 1 trials are the smallest ones that drugs start out with. And that is if we give this to a healthy person, is it going to make them unhealthy? Basically safety and efficacy. Is this drug itself going to actually hurt people? So that's the ones you see recruitment on college campuses and things like that. Phase 1 trials are always in healthy normals. They tend to be small.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
I have a question about that. So if you give it to a healthy person, but I'm assuming you're only giving it to them because they might have a health issue. Is that right?
Not with phase 1.
Okay.
So interestingly, if you look at cancer drugs, chemotherapies, you'll see them talk about phase 2 as being the first phase.
Did this also happen with I think it's AZT, the HIV drug? They skipped phase 1.
Very often, yes. If it's a drug that may have such severe side effects that it can cause severe illness or cause severe reactions, they may not get it approved for phase 1.
Interesting.
For example, chemotherapy.
Yeah.
A lot of chemotherapy is extremely destructive. No sane person, you're not going to ethically tell somebody to go through what essentially amounts to chemical torture for the sole purpose of seeing if it's safe for people. We know it's not safe for people.
Right.
But
it's better than the alternative.
It's better than the alternative. So those will usually skip phase 1 or get an exemption. So certain drugs. But if it's a new blood pressure medication or anything else, okay, let's see what happens. Or people. So generally that runs through phase 1. Phase 2 is typically dose finding. Okay, to have an actual effect on people, does not only phase 1 says, is this safe or not? And again, this can all vary depending on the drug. Phase 2 basically says, okay, does it actually have an effect? And at what dose does it have an effect? If we take 5 milligrams, does it do anything? If we take 10 milligrams, if we take 20 milligrams, does it do anything? So they use phase 2 then to get the data to get the phase 3 trials, which are the huge ones.
Okay.
The phase 3 trials are the big ones, lots of patients, lots of subjects, control arm and whatnot. Those are the really expensive ones. So one of the biggest things, first of all, is to understand how many drugs fail at each phase. Usually less than 1% of the drugs that go through phase 1 trials make it to phase 3 and actually get approved.
Holy shit.
Well, and you'll see all kinds of numbers. Some people are like, it's 1 out of every 1,000. Some people are like, it's 1 out of every 50. It really depends on the type of drug.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is you may have the most promising compound in the world in rat studies. And it goes through and it's safe for humans. And then in phase 2, you find out it's safe for humans because it doesn't do anything in humans. Or You get this drug that really promising in rat studies. It's safe for humans. At 20 milligrams, it's fine for humans. And it seems to have some effect. And then in phase 3 trials, you find that it's actually no better than existing treatments and has more side effects. It's not going to get approved. Hey, I've got this great blood pressure drug. It lowers everyone's blood pressure systolic on average by 6 points. Great, it's safe. Well, the safety profile is exactly the same as this other drug, or if not a little bit worse, but this other drug lowers it by 10 points. We're not going to approve a drug with side effects, the same administration, everything else, that is not any better than anything else on the market. Like there's a lot of things, and that's when you get into like non-inferiority and all that. If you can prove that your drug is just as good as an existing one, you might be able to get approval. If it's just as good but has more side effects, you might not get approval. They're all different ways for drugs to fail.
Interesting.
If a drug fails, it doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad drug. It just means that maybe the wrong indication was found for it. Maybe the dose that was selected in phase 2 ended up being too low to make a difference in phase 3. Maybe the dose in phase 3, maybe the dose that they found in phase 2 that has a certain amount of side effects, like phase 2, you're like 10 milligrams, moderate effects, 20, good effects, a lot of side effects. Depending on which one you take to phase 3, you may find that the drug is no longer better than any other option out on the market. So there are a lot of ways drugs can fail. But the long story short is there are a lot of ways drugs can fail, even good ones. So that leads to a lot of the issues with why like patents exist, for example. Because some of these drugs, phase 3 trials can take millions, tens of millions of dollars and years and years and years to approve. Companies are going to be loath to invest in that unless they know they can make their money back. And not only that.
That's why it comes in.
Because not only that, you're paying not just for that drug, but for all the other drugs that failed that company had to invest in.
Right.
To get to that one drug that worked. Now, obviously the margins here are staggering on some of these drugs. They make obviously billions. Nobody's ever accused pharmas of being nonprofits.
Right.
But it's understanding that, hey, like drug pricing isn't always just about the value of the drug itself. Very often it's like, okay, what can the market absorb? Because right now, Novartis may sit down. I'm calling out Novartis. I'm sorry to anybody who works for Novartis. Novartis may sit down and say, well, we got a really weak drug pipeline coming up. We don't have a lot of blockbusters coming out, but we have this one that's coming through that's doing really well. We think the market can absorb a price of $600 for a month treatment. We could probably negotiate $500 a month with insurance. 500, 600 it is. That's what we're going to charge, not because we necessarily think it's worth it, but because we think that's what we can get for it. Because that's what we need to be profitable for the next year to allow us to continue on drug development.
That makes sense.
So there's a lot of that. Now, of course, a lot of other things go into pricing, but that's a pretty major thing.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Because I understand that. And on the other side of the coin, outside the U.S., we have Canadian prices, we have U.K. prices that are significantly lower for the same drug.
Yeah.
How does that work? And I can understand why people would be furious about that. Yeah. To be like, well, I could get the exact same drug for a fraction of the cost in another country. What the fuck is that?
So what's going to happen is, let's say I have this drug that I think I can get $200 a pill for in the U.S., just pulling out numbers. Canadian government says, okay, we'll buy it. We'll only approve it if we will only buy it through our health system at $50 a pill. That's it. That's all we're going to pay you for it. The company's going, well, we've already determined that each pill doesn't cost us that much to produce. It's not like this pill costs us $45 and that's eating into our margin.
Right.
Every unit we sell is going to be more profit.
Right.
So yeah, we'll sell it for $50 a pill to Canada. India's only going to pay us $10 a pill for it. Well,
India doesn't get that fucking
maybe not. Yeah, because everyone's just going to go to India for it. But that's why the generics then come out in India. Like you see a lot of companies like China and India, which often have generics, and very often it's like generics that shouldn't be generic because they're still on patent. But that's why. Because they're like, look, we can't even pay you $50 a pill. That is like literally like 2 months' salary in some places of this country.
Right.
We can't afford that. So that's one of the problems is these companies
It's a big fucking problem.
It's a big fucking problem. It's a big fucking problem. And that's why people go, well, maybe the U.S. should have this sort of collective bargaining. And to a certain extent, the U.S. has some power to do so. But the fact that private insurance is so big, it's very often bargaining between the companies and the insurance companies. What's the insurance company willing to pay? The insurance company goes, well, X number of people are going to be on this. Here's our premiums. Here's what we're realistically going to pay you. You have this new diabetes medication. if everybody switches to that and we got to pay you $300 or like, let's say $150 a pill each, that's probably going to eat into our profits. We're not going to do that. Drug company negotiates, says, okay, how about 140? So there's a lot of that goes on.
So a lot of people will blame big pharma, but do you think a lot of the blame would actually lie on the insurance companies?
There's a huge amount of that. And, the insurance companies obviously don't want to pay a lot either.
Right, of course.
But it's always going to be, and I think that's why it's very easy to blame big pharma, but like there's a lot of reasons. Like it costs a lot of money to file an IND.
Yeah.
If drug development weren't so, and I'm not saying that, big pharma is going to feel that $100,000 it costs to file that initial drug application. But a small biotech is not going to be able to afford that. It is too expensive.
Makes sense.
To stop those 3 scientists' friends from being able to do it. So what they're going to do, they're going to have to up the valuation and sell to a large pharmaceutical.
That makes sense.
And that's the only way their drug stands a chance of getting approved. So we've almost created a system where some of the costs are so high for small companies, but so only big companies can absorb them. How much do you charge? Does the FDA triple their costs so that pharmaceutical companies will because everyone says, well, there needs to be more FDA oversight of this stuff. And, the FDA is sloppy and too many drugs get approved. Do we increase costs? Do we increase oversight? Do we approve less? Well, that might make the issue worse.
Right.
So, and that's, it's another one of those areas where I think there's no easy culprit to it. There's so many layers. It's a system. It's a systemic issue. And high drug prices, yes, absolutely. I say hey man, Pharma is not exactly like scraping by here. They're not, you don't pull in there and see Hyundais are great cars. I love them. But you don't see just a whole, you look at the C-suite and you look at all the managing directors. These are people who are not hurting for money.
Right.
Same thing with the insurance
Never mind
companies.
the salaries and the stock options. All that.
Exactly.
It's insane.
Exactly. But what you have is you have companies who are beholden to their stockholders. You've got investors looking at their pipelines. What drugs do you have coming up? How much do we think that they're going to be able to sell this drug for? How long are they going to have the patent for? Because as soon as your patent expires.
Me Too drugs come out.
Exactly. Because I can sell this for $500 a pill now. A generic manufacturer, again, doesn't cost me $500 to make.
Right.
The $500 was all the other costs that were associated with this. Cost me about $3 to make.
Right.
Generic company's going to come along and sell them for $5.
Right.
There goes my business.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
why we see so many different statins coming out. It's like we see all these different drugs that essentially do the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a big part of that as well is in the approval process, this whole idea of non-inferiority. If I can come up with a compound that I can sell that is not inferior to anything out there, maybe it's only 1% better, I can get a patent for it and I can sell it on patent and actually make some money off this. In some cases, that's the only way that they can recoup development costs. Because there have been drugs, like I was associated with a blood pressure drug at the time. I think I'm not allowed to say so. But yeah, they'll spend years and years struggling to get it approved. Oh, the FDA didn't like the final dose. They didn't like this profile. They didn't like that. Okay, well, we can finally find some indication that this can get approved for. We couldn't get this drug approved to treat this condition, but we can get it approved to treat this condition. GLP-1 drugs and what they can get approved for and what they were originally approved for versus off-label use. The off-label use may have been the original reason it was developed. But that wasn't enough to get it approved, so they got it approved for a separate use. And now people prescribe it for that separate use, but the off-label was the original purpose. That happens pretty often.
That's so interesting.
So you get a lot of drugs that come out like that where it's just they're marginally different. They're like incremental steps up.
Right.
The pharma company knows that the market is there. They know that the insurance companies have already factored in, well, all of every diabetic patient we have costs us X amount per month. Well, okay, that's how much the market can absorb. You don't have to go through the price negotiations. There's a lot. But again, it's a system.
Here's what I don't understand. Let's say you have a drug that is maybe 1% better, gets approved. But now you've got to sell that drug at a huge cost, whereas the insurance companies or whomever might be like, why would I pay that much more when I could just use this marginally less effective drug and pay a fraction of the price? So then my question is, how are they selling that drug? And where does that come in? Who are they having to convince? Why would any company willingly spend huge amounts of money for a marginally more effective drug, even though it was approved? That doesn't make sense to me.
That's where a lot of that marketing and sales comes in. And I've got to be careful with this because I don't want to.
You don't want to be killed.
Yeah, so disappeared. I think that's why a lot of people object to drug advertising.
Yep.
There have been a lot of regulations about what like pharmaceutical sales reps can give to doctors and hospitals. Because the pharma sales rep says, hey, like I'm not going to pick on Novartis. I am Big Pharma's number 3 sales rep. And we have you're the doctor. We have a good working relationship. And I continuously, like I come around, I aid you in procurement. We're good friends. I bring you to a lot of these different dinners. I give you opportunities to speak at some of these conferences and all that. I don't give you money per se, but we have a close working relationship and we have a close professional relationship. And my company has a close professional relationship with your clinic and your organization. We are now hoping to shift all of our physicians from using this old drug, which is, there's a generic out, but we have this new one that's actually better. And you can tell your patients it's actually better. Because this will lower your blood pressure by another 1 or 2 points. Why would you want to use the one that's less effective? So I'm now going to the physician and saying, look, this is a better compound. The physician goes,
This feels so slimy. This does, cause and I know it's just the example you're using, but like the 1 or 2 points, that's where it starts to feel slimy. They're not lying.
But you're not lying. But also, think about the culpability of the individual. How many people insist on getting the name brand drug and say the generic never worked as well, even if it's exactly the same?
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of that. And that's not to like victim blame and say oh, you're all responsible, but it's really powerful.
Yeah.
If you tell somebody that they can get their condition treated by a new drug, brand new drug, just came out, yeah, it's better than the old one, like 1%. Or, it works just as well as the old one, but fewer side effects. You're going to have a hard time convincing them to take the generic when they could get the new one.
Yeah.
That's human nature. It's the new shiny thing. It's why the iPhone 16, like, is this a 16 or is this a 14 or a 13 or like, what is it? Who knows?
Right.
You open the thing up, you can't tell the difference.
Right.
You sell the new shiny. That same thing holds true. And I think that plays into it.
Man, I was telling you before we started recording, but I've been getting very into that world, trying to learn more about it. The issue is it's very difficult to find nuanced and unbiased sources on it, which is why I was so excited to speak to you about it, because you give so much, you have nuance, you have direct experience with it. I'm reading some books right now on it, but all of the books are extreme.
Yeah.
They're so extreme. And it's like, I think what they do is they highlight, listen, there have obviously been some horror stories within pharma, but like that's not the majority of what happens. That's not like the day-to-day, and it's easier to highlight those and make it appear to be just this one evil thing, when reality is like there's some really amazing things that it's done. You were talking about the researchers involved, and like just the amount of good that's happened is incredible. It's difficult to find unbiased and not sensationalistic sources on this. So I appreciate that insight, and I'm probably going to keep bugging you on it.
Yeah, no, and I think like you said, it's also really hard to find the actual villains.
Yeah.
Because again, like you look at the individual researchers, a lot of them are very passionate about it. They just realize the reality of, hey, if we want to make this into anything, we're going to have to sell.
Yes.
And you even look at like the people in the acquisitions in pharma, a lot of my colleagues in pharma and people who actually worked for the pharmaceuticals very much believed in the mission. They were like, hey, look, we know there's some uncomfortable truths, but yeah, this drug is only 1% better. But you know what? It's 1% better. And the next one after that will be 1% better and 1% better and 1% better.
That's a great argument.
We have to keep innovating. We have to keep doing this. We can't do it for free. And if we try to do it for free, development's going to stagnate. So there's a lot of people making rational arguments. And yes, you can get into the nuance and say, well, they're all wrong and here's a way you could do it. You'd have to have such a systemic overhaul.
Yeah.
And I think we're really resistant to that.
The other aspect of it, the advertising, which I know people get really upset about, I understand. I can also see the other side of it as well. I was talking to this really great man. I'm going to try and bring him on the podcast. He's been a rep for 30 years. He was saying, listen, like there are obvious issues with the advertising, but also if you look at the advertising, it also creates awareness.
Yeah.
For people who might not know that there's an issue with their health, that like maybe this isn't normal, whatever it is, like it does have other aspects. Like it's not just black and white.
Yeah.
There are aspects where people might see commercials for something and be like, you know what, I'm going to talk to my doctor about this issue I'm having. Yeah. And obviously their goal would be for them to take the drug. Right. But like, what if they didn't know they had that issue in the first place?
They give out a list of symptoms. They go, you may have blank. You go, I might. I know I have mesothelioma.
Right.
Do you remember those ads?
I do remember those.
I was like, do I have mesothelioma? I don't know. I might. I hear about it often enough.
Okay. I have a bunch more. How are you on time?
I'm good, man.
Okay. All right. So I have a lot more. This is a really wonderful conversation, man.
Dude, I'm loving it.
Let's go into something about training.
Sure.
So you posted a quote from Lee Haney: "Stimulate, not annihilate."
Yep.
What does that mean to you?
To me, it means that the objective behind a training session is to trigger a stimulus. It's to trigger the body to adapt. That doesn't mean you have to grind it into the ground. The more you damage yourself, the more you have to repair from. The more stress you cause yourself, the more you have to repair from, the more you have to recover from. The objective is to get enough of a stimulus to force adaptation, and not so much that you put your body behind on recovery. If you can get the same effect or similar effect through less stressful work, through not beating yourself up, if you can walk at the end of your session and get the same stimulus or 1% less, that is probably a better session than the one that leaves you crippled. That's been my whole thing. On lifting, you don't need to lift to failure. You don't always need to squat until your nose bleeds. You don't need to run every interval at threshold until you puke. There's huge value to subthreshold work. Long runs over 2 hours, not really needed. Physiologically, there's no additional stimulus at that distance for the most part. So it's useless. You can do it, but it's useless. Training to failure, doing more sets than you really need to trigger an adaptation, it's not necessary. So what that means to me is that you don't actually have to suffer to improve. Sure, discomfort, 100%. Training is never comfortable. Pushing yourself to the point that triggers a stimulus means you're pushing your body outside of its equilibrium. That's always going to be a little uncomfortable. But suffering is not needed. And I think, it applies to runners who love just hitting every single session at threshold and going for hard runs and all that. And you go, you don't need to do that. Or people training for like marathons who are like, I've got to get in my 25-mile run this weekend. It's going, honestly, much after 15 miles, unless you just want the experience of being on your feet for a long period of time, that 22-mile training session is not causing you any adaptations that a 15-mile training session isn't, unless you're very, very, very elite. But, for the most part, it's this idea that, hey, look, sometimes less is never more, but less is better. That's okay.
That's a great quote. Less is never more, but it can be better.
Yeah.
So now the next logical question would be, how does someone know if they've stimulated enough? Right? Like,
yeah.
And this obviously depends on whether it's strength training, whether it's running, whether it's whatever it is. And I don't necessarily want to go down a philosophical aspect, more like practical. Let's say someone's lifting weights and they want to get stronger. Maybe they want to build more muscle. How do they know if they've stimulated it enough? What telltale signs are there for them to know this?
That's actually interesting, because with strength training, a lot of things can improve your ability to exert strength that you may not even think. Like, how do you know a dynamic effort session like speed work is good for you? The only way to know is that you get faster week to week. But does that mean your bench is getting stronger? You don't know. So that's why I always believe in the continuous reassessment. And that is not continuously testing your 1 rep max, but it's having some method to continuously reassess your relative performance. Whether that is on the running side of things, like, looking at something as simple as your relative heart rate on a given run, looking at your, relative level of fatigue, on longer runs, looking at things like velocity on your bar movement, other things like, even number of practical repetitions you can do at 85% of your max. Like having a lot of standards that continuously let you evaluate whether or not the trend is in the correct direction. That works if you follow a program that does not have planned overreaching then deloading. I never liked that.
Me either.
Because that really does obscure progress as well.
It does.
Because as you're pushing from too low volume to overreaching, you don't know if you're actually improving or if you're just going from being under stimulus to over stimulus and then deloading. But a good program with a more or less equalized week to week, progressive overload in the sense that when I can do more, I will, not I'm going to try to do more, but when I can do more, I will. Showing that sort of steady improvement is pretty much the only sign you need that you're going in the right direction. But that means tracking trends and tracking direction, not necessarily individual points.
That's a great way to look at it. It's also not the answer anybody wants.
No, absolutely not.
Everyone's like,
People
tell
are
me exactly.
How do I know? Well, and it's actually really interesting because one of the methods that I typically use to track development is I use two numbers. I use someone's estimated 1 rep max, and I use somebody's estimated threshold, lactate threshold, if you want to call it that, or VT2 or anything else. Predicting using that number to base their training off of. 100% of your 1 rep max is X number of repetitions. I don't necessarily have to have somebody do a 1 rep max week to week. And I can have them do, 85% one week, 80% the next week, 77.5 the next week, 95% the next week. And every couple of weeks, I'll just add a pound or add a kilo to their predicted 1 rep max. If they continue performing the sessions, they're continuing to improve. If they begin failing short, then clearly that increase was inappropriate. If they're continuously having an easy time with it, I increase that number more. Same thing with a running threshold. If I determine that your running threshold is a 7-minute mile right now, and that is your estimated threshold output, 10K or whatever distance we want to call that, and after 4 weeks of training, I drop that to a 6:58, and I base your new running percentages off that. Okay, we add 30 seconds to that for your 6-minute intervals or whatever else. If I'm continuously bringing that number down, I don't ever have to retest because I'm keeping those percentages I'm working you at pretty much the same. If you're continuously crushing your workouts, crushing those intervals, feeling great, I keep decreasing it. If you're not making any improvements whatsoever, if you're feeling strung out, I keep that where it is. So that is how, like I said, the whole process of knowing if you're doing enough is reevaluation. Obviously, you need to look at certain norms. Okay, well, is 1 set per day enough? Probably not. What is a good quote unquote evidence-based number of sets? Well, we know that 3 to 4 working sets per exercise is pretty good. If you're looking for strength development, there might be a skill component. You might get to benefit from some more skill work and so on and so forth. But the whole idea is that every workout leaves you feeling challenged, but never in danger of not completing it. And I think that's always
a great guideline.
If you ever have to dip into that extra reserve and you think, if I was having a bad day, I wouldn't be able to do this, then that's probably too hard. So I would say that the proper level of stimulus is one that you could do on your worst day. Worst day being relative. You're going to have some people who are like, well, every now and then I work doubles at work and get no sleep for 36 hours and don't eat. And I'm like, okay, maybe not that bad.
That day doesn't count.
That day doesn't count. But
your next worst day.
Your next worst day. A little bit better than that. But yeah, it's basically saying if you went in completely demotivated and just feeling a little bit off, could you still complete this workout? If so, that's probably the appropriate level of stimulus.
I love all of that. For me, as I'm thinking about it, and I know you see this as well, one of the biggest issues I see with people is they don't follow a fucking program.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so how the fuck can you track your progress if you're not following a program?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the easiest, lowest base level advice is get on a program and then from there track your progress. And that's it. For example, I've been really excited about getting back into jumping and plyos and I want to get a 40-inch box jump, which I haven't done in, unfortunately, probably 8 years at this point. So I want to get back to it. And so I'm just doing very simple plyos, just once every 10 days.
Yeah.
I'm doing a plyo work. I don't even do it once a week, once every 10 to 12 days. And I started at 32 and then I went to 34 and I was stuck at 34 for a minute. And then I went to 36 and then I was doing sets of 3 at 36. And then the other day, after about a month and a half of being staying at 36 for threes, I finished my 3rd rep on the first set, and I was like, I could do 4. And so then it not only could I do 4, but also it felt different. My RPE, if you want to use that, I felt like I was floating a little bit longer than I was prior weeks. Yeah. And these are the things that This is number one, how you track progress. But number two is I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't following a program.
Right. Exactly.
You need to have a plan so that you know exactly so you can repeat it and try and improve from that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you're blind and you have no idea what you're improving or not.
Yeah. Agreed. No, because the whole purpose of reevaluation is you can't reevaluate something if you don't have cohesive data.
Yes.
You can't reevaluate a mess.
Yes.
If you don't have a system, there's nothing to reevaluate. You're just looking at a different type of mess. And you're going, is this mess better than that mess? I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Like if you have a program and you know what you're doing week to week, even if it's a very simple one, there's a reason why people progress on terrible programs.
Yeah.
It's literally just because it's a program.
Yeah.
It's not because the program's good.
Correct.
Yeah.
I've wanted to talk to you about this one for a while. So when you and I were working together, you made me do something one time and I hated it.
Oh dear.
You made me run I forget if it was a 45-minute or a 70-minute session. It was one of those. But you explicitly put in the notes, you said no screens, no TV, because that's always what I've done.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's good. I think it's a crutch that I have where it's like I've always got to keep my mind sort of busy and not focus on what I'm doing, which I think could be a real problem with me from a dopamine perspective.
Uh-huh.
Why did you have me do that? Was that something you just did for me? Do you have all of your athletes do this? Like, why did you have me say, hey, no, it was the worst run of my life.
Yeah.
I put a fucking towel over the screen and I just sat there and I focused on my breathing. And you even said, tell me what you think about.
Yeah.
You're like, what thoughts are going through your head? And I was like, I fucking hate you. But so why do you do that?
Well, I mean, and that was actually a pretty good outcome from it. That's one of the better emotions that I've heard from them. No, it's not something I give to everybody. It's that there are certain variations on that where you're basically having somebody sit in the experience of what they're doing with training. And I will sometimes do this for people like, I've had ultra runners and marathon runners I've worked with. I'm like, why are you running a marathon? Do you actually like running? Like, you don't seem to like the sessions. You hate it. So why are you doing it? Like, when we distract ourselves from things, if I'm engaged in some activity and I'm distracting myself, my underlying relationship with the activity is not changing. I can hate what I'm doing, but if I'm distracting myself, I'm kind of overwhelming that internal hate for it with something else. That's both good and bad. It's good because it's a good way of making yourself do something you don't want to do, but it's bad because I'm not changing my relationship with the thing I'm doing much at all. Because what I'm distracting with myself is completely detached from the activity I'm doing. If I'm sitting on my stationary bike but watching a TV show I want to watch, I'm not liking the bike more. I'm potentially liking the show less, but I'm distracting myself from my dislike of the bike.
So true. Yeah.
Right? I hate that show. Why? I always watched it when I was on the bike. But what it really does is it kind of forces you to examine your relationship with the exercise that you're actually doing. Why am I doing this exercise? Do I fundamentally hate this? If I fundamentally hate this, why do I continue to persist with it? Do I believe that the good outweigh the bad? Am I only tolerating this because I think it's the best way to get to my goals? Or do I inherently see the value? If I don't have a way to distract myself, I have to come to terms with what I'm actually doing and question whether or not this is the way I would actually want to do it. Because I've had people say, like, they've done that kind of drill. They're like, you know what? I don't actually mind running that much. Like, I kind of got into a zone. I'm like, cool. Yeah, maybe you are a runner. Like, you actively seem to enjoy or at least can tolerate the process. There are other people who go, I didn't like it because I was bored. That's fine. And there are people who go, I didn't like it because I fundamentally hate running. Like, all I could think about was how much everything ached. And I was distracting myself. And I'm going, well, that's not good because you're trying to engage in something on a long-term basis here that you have a negative relationship with. And when left to your own devices, you need some sort of distraction to force yourself to keep doing it. Maybe we need to find something else for you. So that's a big part of it. Sometimes it's good for understanding people's psychology a little bit, because especially for someone like an ultra runner, because you're going to hit some very dark places out there on the run, and they're not going to be able to think about anything. And you want to think, is running distressing to them, or is it a source of zen? If it's distressing to them, they're going to have a really hard time doing that ultra. Is somebody running just to be in good shape? In which case, there are other alternatives. If they're doing that exercise and they go, I hate every second of this. This is painful. I'm counting every single step and can't wait for this to end. I'm thinking about how much my shoulders hurt. I'm thinking about how uncomfortable this is on my ankles. Either we've got to somehow fix that relationship with running.
Yeah.
Either if you need to run, let's fix your relationship with it somehow. Let's realize that the act of running is insufferable to you, and let's change some things. Because I think it's with a lot of things that we do. we don't always take the time to examine whether or not we enjoy the act itself, or whether or not, like, what is our relationship with this act itself? Is it tolerance? Is it love? Is it disdain? And I think not letting ourselves sit in that does us a great disservice, especially with anything like training, things like hobbies. That disconnect between something we think is good for us, so therefore we do it, and something we actually enjoy doing. Obviously, there are going to be things that we do because we have to. There are also going to be things that we do because we feel we have to, because we don't know the alternative. Mm-hmm. And sometimes this is a way of saying maybe we need to find an alternative.
I love that. For me, it's very different when I run on a treadmill versus when I run outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I run outside, man, I don't need anything. I'm good. Like I don't need headphones. I like the wind going in my ears, and I like nature and smelling stuff, and I love that. Yeah. But that was when I was on the treadmill, and when I was living in the city. Mm-hmm. Like now I live out more in the country, and like I can run outside, like, and I love it. Yeah. But on the treadmill, dude, I fucking hate it. Like that's just, but that's what I needed to do at that time for my goal, and it was worth it. Yep. But I didn't continue to not watch screens. I was like,
I think that's part of it too, though, because it's going, all right, so we know that you hate treadmill running.
Yeah.
And every session we spend on the treadmill is a net negative for you psychologically.
Yeah. At least during it. After it, I'm proud of it.
Yeah, sure. But we kind of need to know that. We need to know that on a day of low motivation, that treadmill is going to take a lot out of you.
Yeah.
On days when you're not feeling good and you just want to go outside, that treadmill is a death knell.
Yeah.
And so like even just knowing that says, okay, every session has a cost with it. Every session you manage physical costs, you manage psychological costs, emotional costs. We know that treadmill running is, I don't want to overstate it, but it's kind of distressing emotionally because you're like, I don't want to be here. It's boring. I hate it. This is terrible. That's a cost. And I think there's a lot of value for people doing that in some of their training programs. Going back to like gatekeeping a little bit, I always laugh when people are like, they'll see pictures of people doing like bungee exercises and things like that. And they're like, oh, people do anything but exercise. I'm going, they're having fun.
That's a blast, dude. I'm so jealous of those. I want to try that. Yeah.
I'm going, okay, so maybe it's not quote unquote the best exercise.
What is the best?
Well, what is the best?
What is the best? Actually, like shut up.
Just cut. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, so you run. Congratulations. Are you winning any races? Yeah. Like, unless the answer is yes, then admit that you're just doing something that you think is a little bit better for you than what somebody else is deciding to do.
Correct.
Let it go. But with all those things, like if that's a form of exercise that's fun and emotionally interesting, unless you have to like watch a screen when you're doing the bungee thing, you're probably getting more out of that from a mental health perspective as well as a physical health perspective. It's good to know that. Mm-hmm. So that same person who loves the bungee exercise, you put them on a treadmill. Yeah, the treadmill might be better cardiovascular exercise for them. But when they're having a bad week, that could be the worst thing for them.
Yeah.
Congratulations. We've helped improve your heart by a tiny little bit, but mentally, the thing you really needed more than anything else was a break.
Yeah.
And you needed to have fun, and you needed to distract yourself by doing something that requires your attention, not distract yourself by distracting yourself by watching a screen. So.
Can you explain peptides like I'm 5?
So.
Or an 8-year-old.
An 8-year-old. We'll go with an 8-year-old. Well, no, I think the problem with peptides is obviously it's such a range of compounds. Mm-hmm. And because the idea of a peptide, I mean, like saying peptides is pretty much like, well, that's like any amino acid compound.
Right.
That could mean a lot of things, like, your whey protein shake is peptides.
In the context of they're exploding right now on social media, whether we see like BPC 157 or we even see like semaglutide, like we see like a huge number of peptides being marketed. Can you, like, what do they do, generally speaking? Like, what are they, basically? Generally speaking, what do they do? What are the range of them? And are there any that are actually worthwhile?
Yeah, so the whole range of peptides, a lot of these are, some of them are drugs that never went through development. So what's really interesting is if something is banned by the FDA, like, for example, steroids are difficult to get. But... well, what I'm saying is like steroids are difficult to get because once they're approved, they're scheduled. And if something is scheduled, it has to be on that list. Trenbolone is on the schedule. It's, if you possess it without a prescription or you blah, 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 it's like this sort of crime. If something never went through the drug development process and never actually gets on the schedule, you can have all that you want. Ostarine, for example, something like that. Even though that's technically...
It's a SARM, right?
Yeah. But trenbolone is a SARM, technically. Any sort of compound that activates certain androgen receptors in certain kinds of tissue, whether it's skeletal muscle versus sex-linked tissue, for example, is technically a SARM. It's something that has a different effect on tissue depending on what part of the body it's in. That is technically a SARM. So something like ostarine may have taken effect on the androgen receptor, but it's selective as to which tissue, which types of cells it's more active in than others.
Okay.
So a SARM, ideally, when people are talking about it that way, it's more active in muscular tissue than in sex-linked tissue. So less likely to cause prostate enlargement and growth of, vocal cord changes and blah, 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 blah. So, but that's quote unquote not a peptide. But basically, like a lot of these peptides are just compounds, enzymes or, specific drugs that have been developed at some point for particular indications. And very often they either weren't approved or they never made it very far in development, or like BPC 157 never really made it out of preclinical trials. It was never made illegal anywhere, so some companies just started producing it, found that it had some interesting effects. Now there's actually a clinical trial for Bepicin, I think being conducted in Mexico. I don't know if it finished, but BPC is actually in clinical trials.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So they run the gamut. Some peptides are very good. Some have really good research behind them. Simply because something is a peptide doesn't mean it's bad. Knowing about drug development and how much it costs to get into it and all the regulations and everything else, you can see why a lot of promising peptides where they may not see a huge market for it necessarily don't get developed. Because, a company, again, poor Novartis. Novartis is going to say like, hey, they're going to say that's an interesting looking compound. You know what though? That could fail. We don't see a huge market for it. We're not going to purchase it. Like, thanks. That it sounds like a great compound, but we can't even sell it as an orphan drug, which is when companies get, like, for drugs that have a very small group of people that would work on, companies get certain exemptions and benefits for putting forward those drugs, even if they only treat a small number of people. So that's how some very niche compounds get approved. But peptides may just not have much of a financial incentive to get approved. So you'll very often see these things coming out, and depending on which one, they're very often legal to buy because there's no specific law against them. They're not for human consumption, but that doesn't stop you from using it. And some of them, like, for example, BPC 157, are very interesting compounds. In BPC 157's case, it's actually a gastric peptide, which means it's derived from actually a naturally occurring enzyme/peptide in your digestive system, which means it actually resists absorption, resists digestion, so you can take it orally. And it does seem to have some pretty good effects in, I think it's like epithelial and like blood vessel growth and a couple of other things. So it's a very interesting compound because it can be used to treat both any issues with GI inflammation or insufficiency and also potentially like wound healing. So that's one particular one that seems interesting.
I'm taking BPC 157 orally.
Yeah.
And I like to run tests on myself. I treat myself like an experiment. And I've tried for a long time. I had just diarrhea, just like I had gastric upset for a very long time, like for no reason, or no reason that I could pinpoint. And I went to various doctors. I got all these tests done, and they're like, yeah, like maybe IBS. Like we don't really know. But I got a lot of like nothing burger answers. Yeah. I started taking BPC 157. I don't know if it was that. But after I started taking it, my diarrhea has essentially went away. Yeah. Which is fucking crazy to me.
Well, and if you think about it, like if this is a compound that improves like vascular perfusion and it can possibly help in like maybe help in some of the regrowth of like cilia and certain cells in the intestinal wall, you think that actually makes sense. Like if you were having absorption issues before and you were getting fluid dumping or, proliferation of certain bacteria in the gut, it would make sense that, maybe this actually helped heal part of it. So I think the reason why peptides get so much miscommunication is because they're not controlled. Right. All we have to look at in many cases is preclinical data, so rat models, because they don't get into human data until they actually go through the approval process, in which case they either succeed or they fail and nobody publishes the research, because in a lot of cases in clinical trials, this is actually a big stink as well. You don't really have to publish failed clinical trials.
What?
You do, but you also don't. You know who the biggest offenders are in not publishing failed clinical trials?
I would love to know.
Universities. Everybody accuses Big Pharma of like not publishing negative data from clinical trials. And if you look at all the companies that, because technically there are fines. If you register your clinical trial with clinical trial on clinicaltrials.gov, have you ever gone to clinicaltrials.gov?
No.
Go to clinicaltrials.gov. You can technically look up every clinical trial that's ongoing in the US.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of cool. But if you register a trial there and you go through the trial and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Technically, after a certain period of time, let's say I run a trial and I said, okay, the trial finishes in 2025. 2026 rolls around, 2027, the government goes, what happened with that? And you're like, I don't know. I don't know. Technically, you can get fined. Some academic institutions, like close to 50%, I think, of their trials that they've registered have had their database, like date of closing, expire and haven't registered final results. Because everyone blames Big Pharma for like, oh, they're probably hiding all those failed drug trials and all that. Going, no, they're not.
What incentive would the universities have to not share that?
Oh man, this could get us into trouble too. Except universities. Big Pharma will just like put on cement shoes. Universities,
But wouldn't Big Pharma fund some of these universities' studies? So could it be a backdoor Big Pharma?
in some cases, but in a lot of cases, like some of this research doesn't necessarily have to be for like final phase drug approval. Like a lot of these, like university or like there are a lot of university CROs.
Okay.
Contract research organizations associated with universities that may run, like they may contract out to separate pharmaceuticals, or they may develop their own drugs, like push them through phase 1, for example, just even as like to, own the patent on it. Like there are a lot of reasons why they may do it. And it's not necessarily nefarious. In some cases, it's just, we didn't get the data we wanted and we closed the database and we don't have anything to report. And
That's so unscientific.
But
If
that's
you want
the
to
problem.
contribute to the scientific discussion, at least share your data.
But that's part of it is like, in universities, especially with high turnover, there's a need to publish. I'm not going to put together a paper that says this whole thing failed because there's no finding here. Like, but that's part of the criticism.
Is that ego?
Some of it, yeah. But it's also like, it is so much easier to get a successful trial or a successful piece of research published than a failed piece of research. It's like, like nobody wants to go like, yeah, I went searching for the lost Incan gold and didn't find anything. Okay.
It's true.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's true.
But like, when you find something, it's great. Everyone wants to report on it. So failed trials and failed findings often don't get reported. But anyway, so like going along with that, again, how opaque and messy that whole process is, in a lot of cases, you will see that, peptides are those compounds that are usually, most of them are at the phase where if they had the right support, they might get picked up for like phase 1, phase 2 trials. So most of what you're seeing out there is, honestly interesting stuff. There might even be some interesting data. There might be some interesting like phase 1 trials even behind it, but they just never progressed. And as such, it's kind of, it's a little bit cutting edge. Just because they're a peptide doesn't mean they're ineffective. Just because you can buy them on Amazon doesn't mean they're ineffective, because I think you can buy BPC tablets on Amazon.
Can you?
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wild. Used to have to go to sites called like superallamericanpeptides.com and they're like, pay with Bitcoin or send us a photo of your credit card. We accept Western Union. And now Amazon's like, yeah, we got you. But
I didn't realize you get. I get my. I work with Merrick. I'm sponsored by Merrick, so I've been getting it through them, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies, especially, like they look at a lot of the preclinical data. They look at the mechanism, and they actually start to run. Like they say, okay, well, side effects are fairly minimal. Maybe there's some phase 1 data on it, so let's administer it and let's actually track the results. And that's just as much scientific communication as a published research. And so some of the stuff actually does work quite well. We don't know the magnitude of how well it works because we don't have all the formalized data. It would be nice, but I think that's why it gets so polarizing, where you'll hear about this brand new peptide and people are all excited about it because of the rat data.
Right.
Do we have any human data? Maybe not, like SLU, PP, whatever that one is.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Very interesting compound. How much data do we have? Not a lot. Very compelling mechanism of action. Very interesting initial data I've seen from people, but such a small amount of it.
Right.
Do we really know on a large scale it's going to work? Cardarine, GW5156. Great. Seems like it really has all kinds of positive effects on mitochondrial development. It's not quite exercise in the bottle, but it potentiates all the cardiovascular exercise you do.
Which is crazy.
Crazy. Also caused a runaway form of cancer in some lab rats. But again, were these lab rats that were already prone to this kind of cancer? Why didn't it get developed? Did the company develop it just think that, oh man, yeah, it's only this one kind of cancer, but it's going to be really hard to get approval for this.
Right.
We're not going to have much luck for a weight loss drug that has the burden or stigma of increasing the rate of certain kinds of colon cancer. It's just not going to get approved. So we stop development. That's that whole market. It's some positive, some negative. In most cases, these are compounds that were developed or derived from other compounds, very often in labs, very often by, small companies or academic researchers, very promising data, had some initial findings, and just for whatever reason haven't made it through any trial process yet.
And feel free not to answer. We can cut it if you don't want to. Do you experiment with any peptides or SARMs or anything?
I have. I've played around with a lot of them, a lot of peptides in the past.
Okay.
Never to the point where I think I would have enough good data from some of them that I would say, yeah, that definitely helped or definitely didn't. So I'm not a quote unquote huge believer in any of them.
Okay.
I never do, well, a little bit like you said, I've never been on a program for any of them long enough to use myself as a viable guinea pig.
Got it.
So I'm perfectly willing to admit that if I had a good period of training, it might have been placebo, it might not scientific. So I can't really make a claim either way.
Makes total sense. I respect that. Yeah. All right. So I have 3 more questions.
Sure.
And then, dude, I have so many more that I wanted to ask you, but like people are going to lose their shit at a fucking 7-hour podcast. Looking back at your whole training career as an athlete, not as a coach, what was your favorite or peak time in your own training? Like, what was your favorite time as like an athlete?
The first time I was training for an ultra.
When was that?
2014.
Okay. So about 10 years ago or so?
Yeah.
A little bit longer. Why was that your favorite?
I got burnt out on triathlons. I never got really great, but I was about to have what I thought was going to be the race of my life. And that's when I got in my horrible bike crash. And it was like 6 months before my triathlon that I got in a bike crash, but it completely wrecked the rest of my training cycle. I was supposed to do a half leading up to it that I couldn't participate in because I could barely walk. And so I put in so much effort. I was so excited about it. I had invested all this time in thinking I was going to be really good at it, and just to see it not turn out the way I wanted it to was super disappointing. And I needed something that scratched that itch, and I realized that the part of that training I really loved was just the long weekends out there. And it wasn't even like long rides. It was just being out in the woods, like, doing because I would do these long rides, and what I realized I liked was just being out in the countryside away from everything.
Yeah.
And when I first decided to train for an ultra, I was like, wait a minute. I can just go for like a nice, easy, quiet jog in the woods for like 2 or 3 hours and call that training. Like, sign me up.
Yeah.
It was the most liberating experience in training I've ever had, because I think what I had to do at that point was just spend more time on my feet. And so there was so little pressure for me to like talk about my training. There was so little, because they were like, so yeah, tell me about your training. You're like, well, I went out there for 2.5 hours, and you want to see my blisters? People are like, no. And you go, okay, I have nothing to talk about then. Like, I went and took a shit in the woods. Like, do you want to talk about that?
Did you do that on your long
ultra
runs?
Oh my God. Yeah. All the time. Dude, that's like ultra running is literally, it's like the world's longest buffet, and you get to shit in the woods in between.
Oh my gosh.
But like, it was just such a liberating type of training. Cause like I was just out there, I think for the first time in a really long time, doing something that I just enjoyed the process of. And honestly, I think that was really eye opening. That was my favorite time.
I love that.
And man, yeah, because I would just be out there, and sometimes I would listen to music, sometimes I wouldn't. I would just like try to find these little paths through the woods. And when you're out there, you're like, dude, I'm in this like trail network, and I'm going by time, not distance. Every time I would see a little turnoff I've never taken, I'd take it. And it was the most like mentally cleansing time in my life. So that was my favorite training.
What are you scared of?
I think if nothing else, my fear would always be, obviously at this point, I don't want to let down my son. I want to be somebody he can be proud of. And I think my fear is that I would be somebody he's not proud of. And it's not that I need his approval, but it's almost like, in the past I always used to say I wanted to be the kind of person that, 10-year-old me would have looked up to. Be like, yeah, you're cool. I'd be like, all right, I made it. Because still every time I get like a thumbs up from like a 12-year-old, you're like, yeah, all right. You think my truck is cool? All right, buddy. Like, I'm making it. Yeah, I think in a lot of cases that's it. I'm afraid that I'll make a decision or compromise my integrity on something anything like that that would make somebody who once looked up to me disappointed. And of course, you're always going to disappoint someone.
Of course.
There's no way. You're always going to, you can have somebody who's, your biggest fair weather fan on earth, and you say or do that one wrong thing and they're going to, and that's not it. It's really just saying, I hope I've lived my life with enough, at least consistency and integrity that my kid would be proud of me. And, I think as you're an adult, the more you grow up, the more you realize that if you're ever hoping you'll have it figured out, that's not true. It's like people are like, well, when do you actually figure out what you want to be? You never do. When do you actually feel like an adult? You're like, you never do. I'm just a big dumb kid with gray hairs in my face. Like that's it. And then so I don't think you're ever going to figure it out. And so I'm not like, I'm not afraid I'm going to be like a financial failure. I'm not afraid of any of that. It's more just, okay, am I going to work so hard, what I think, to like leave a positive legacy behind, to contribute positively to everyone around me, that my biggest fear is that somebody would say, yeah, but you threw everything away, or you compromised what you were, or you hurt a lot of people. I think that's it. And I know that sounds really vague, but I've thought about that quite a bit. I've thought about how decisions, even how like my mood on some days, like how am I going to be perceived by somebody who's associated with me? And am I going to be somebody that they're proud to be associated with? So I think that's tough, because I think a lot of my personal issues I think frankly for a lot of my life I was very selfish. And I don't mean like I was just looking out for number one, but I think I made a lot of decisions without necessarily thinking about anybody else, because I didn't think I had that much to be accountable to. Like obviously I wanted to do right by people, but I never thought of my own personal actions and what I did for myself as really affecting anyone other than me. And now when I realize that they do, there's a lot of fear associated with that. Because before I'd be like, yeah, you know what? Someone doesn't like me, they don't like me. Well, now suddenly there's somebody associated with that. There's somebody associated with me. There's somebody who I want them to be able to be proud. And since I never really feel like I have all the answers, since I'm just trying to do the best I can, trying to be the best I can on every day, but I know that's not always going to be the right thing to do. Sometimes I wonder, like, am I doing right? So that's where the fear is.
What are you excited about?
I don't know, because I wouldn't say I'm happy with where I am, but I like where everything is going. And I think, obviously I'm excited to see my kid grow up, but I don't know. That's a tough one. And it's not that I'm not excited about anything, but it's like I take a lot of excitement in silly little things.
Like what?
I'm excited to take my new bike out and go for, like, there's a climb nearby that I've wanted to do for a couple of weeks. I'm really excited for that because it looks like it's going to be good weather. And, I'm really excited that, maybe later this year or early next year, I might be going back to Australia for a seminar. Like,
nice.
It's a lot of little things like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think what started making me happy is just finding little things to get excited about on a daily basis. And in terms of career, I'm happy with where it's going. I'm excited to see the book published. But
Can you talk about the book for a second?
Yeah. So, man, that's been a long time coming. Well, because the first Hybrid Athlete book was really a collection of articles.
Yeah.
And it was a collection of articles and things I've been working on for years, finally put together in a book. This one I worked with a publisher who let me write it from the ground up.
That's awesome.
And so this book is basically like everything I've wanted to teach about hybrid training and programming from scratch. And it's very much okay, here are the underlying systems. Because the thing about hybrid training is you have to understand each sport or discipline to be able to simplify it, which is going to let you combine it. So it's this idea that I want to help have the reader feel like, okay, hey, I know what's important in running now. I know what's important in cycling or in cardiovascular training. I understand what's important in strength training. And then now I know which of those things are important when I put them all together so that I can build a program that I want. And that to me is why I'm looking forward to the book. I'm like, okay, this one's actually more of a roadmap. Because the last book came out in a time when no one thought it was really something you could do. Mm-hmm. And this book was saying you can do it. And this book is saying, okay, here's exactly how you do it. So
I love
that's
that.
going to be the book.
And it's called The Ultimate Hybrid Athlete?
Yep.
When is it? Do you know when it's coming out?
November is the date of publication.
Okay, so this podcast will
copy.
come out maybe like 4 weeks before that. So everyone, please go follow Alex. We'll put your Instagram, and where's the best place to get in touch or to know when the book is out? Is it Instagram?
So, yeah, best place would be my Instagram. And we also have the domain name, I
Okay.
think, Ultimate Hybrid Athlete or hybridathletebook.com.
Let me know. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yes, please.
We'll put that
'Cause
there.
We just picked it up.
Good. Yeah. Just text it to me, and we'll put it in the show notes.
Perfect.
But dude, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Dude, awesome. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please leave a 5-star review, whether you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, give it a thumbs up on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you don't already. Make sure you follow Alex. Make sure you get his book when it comes out. I'm going to be the first in line to get it. Again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful week. Talk to you soon.